Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very, very special installment of our Kol Yom Rishon Midrashat Yom Rishon program. This is a program that, of course, was very dear to Rabbi Arbesfeld and the Arbesfeld family, and today is a very special day as the family has sponsored today's Kol Yom Rishon program in memory of Rabbi Arbesfeld, commemorating his first Yortzeit. I want to thank Rabbi Dov Winston for putting this program together every single week. And of course, those who are viewing today are welcome to come again and again for all of the wonderful speakers that we offer here on Sunday morning. But today is a little bit different. Our rabbis have a phrase, Chaval al da'avdin v'lo mishtachrim. Woe is to us, how sad it is when we have someone who is lost and there's no one else found like him anymore. We're told that all people are created equal, but some are more equal than others. Rabbi Soloveitchik tells us that all people are unique, and that's what the laws of Avelis are about. But some people are simply more unique than others. Rabbi Arbesfeld was more unique than others while he was alive. And now that he has passed, and now that we're marking his first Yortzeit, we are intensely aware of the fact that he was so unique. And he doesn't quite leave anyone behind, whether in his family, whether in the REIT's board, or otherwise, who was quite like him. On the sixth night of Pesach, everyone is welcome to join us for a special Yizkor program that we'll be hosting on behalf of the university, marking rabbinic alumni who passed, members of our family, and Yeshiva University is a family who have passed, and great individuals who died during this pandemic. Of course, Rabbi Arbesfeld will be one of those. And the word lost is a very powerful word, because for those who passed during this terrible pandemic, we feel as if they were lost. I was zochet to be one of the 10, 11 people at Hai's funeral. No one was able to really go. Rabbi Rosenzweig ran the funeral, and we were there with a few family members. How could it be that someone like Rabbi Arbesfeld had only 10 people at his funeral, 10 people at his burial? How could it be that Anne and the family didn't have throngs of people waiting outside to come in and pay a shiva call? We get the feeling that the people that were lost during this pandemic were lost. Somehow they disappeared. Today, with the generosity of the family sponsoring today's program in memory of his Yortzeit, we state they are not lost. Chaval da'avdin, they are lost from this world, but they are not lost. And we are all committed, both the family, the community, the Yeshiva University, and the Rabbi Isaac Ochanan Theological Seminary, to make sure that Rabbi Arbesfeld, a truly unique force in this world, will never be lost. It is my great pleasure to call upon the president of Yeshiva University and REITs, a landsman to Rabbi Arbesfeld, a fellow Queens young man, grew up, and Rabbi Arbesfeld was not only so impressed and so happy to be able to be working with Rabbi Berman, but also so proud of a fellow Queens landsman to become president of Yeshiva University and REITs. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's program, Rabbi Dr. Ari Berman.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Penner. And thank you, Rabbi Penner, for your incredible leadership of REITs and vision for continuing and furthering the Torah of REITs, which is so emblematic of this program, these kinds of programs, in which you were partners with Hai in envisioning a whole new reach of our Torah for our Rosh Yeshiva, for whom Hai deeply cherished. Today is, brings us back to one of the most difficult days of a year filled with many difficult days. When I think about this past year, this day, this Yortzeit, stands out in my mind, with all of the loss and all of the challenge. hearing Hai passed away was one of the most painful experiences of this year. I remember speaking to him just a little while beforehand when he was in the hospital, and he was excited about coming out and filled with his characteristic exuberance for life and for Torah and for support of Torah, and just the loss, the magnitude of the loss, both on a personal level, on an institutional level, and for the Jewish people and Jewish community. It's so painful. Today we have represented multi-generations of the Arbesfeld family. Asher yeshnu po v'asher einenu po. And it's so much of what Pesach is about. At the core of Pesach is V'gadat levincha b'yom hahu lemor ba'avor zeh asher Hashem li b'tzeisi miMitzrayim. At the core of Pesach is a parent telling a child, as a father telling a son, this is the mitzvos of Pesach. V'gadat levincha b'yom hahu lemor. This is the Masorah. And the commentaries on the pasuk point out it's somewhat unusual. We're talking about matzah, we're talking about marar, and it says ba'avor zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim. As Ibn Ezra points out, quoting Perush, it should be the opposite. It should be zeh ba'avor. It's not this is the reason, but the reason why we do these mitzvahs is because God took us out of Mitzrayim. It should be reversed, the pasuk, zeh ba'avor. This is the reason for the mitzvahs is because God took us out of Mitzrayim. The Ibn Ezra and similarly Rashi says it's just the opposite. It's ba'avor zeh. It's for the mitzvahs. It's for the mitzvahs that God took us out of Mitzrayim. That the whole point of coming out of Mitzrayim, the whole point of our lives is for Torah and mitzvahs. And this is a family that embodies these values of V'gadat levincha, a parent telling a child one generation to the next generation, that the reason why we're here is to do and to perpetuate Torah and mitzvos for us and for the next generations. This is what the Arbesfeld family stood for, and this is what Hai stood for. And we're here this morning to commemorate Hai. But this is, Rabbi Penner said, this is just continuing our commemoration of Hai, because we'll never forget Hai. And it continues at our dinner, at the Reitz dinner on April 27th, which is a memory of Hai Arbesfeld. And at that Reitz dinner, we are going to unveil one of the last major wishes of Hai himself. One of the last, at least when it comes to Yeshiva University, the last things that I spoke to him about and that we all at Yeshiva spoke to him about was Hai's wish to endow a chair for Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz in memory of his father, Abraham Arbesfeld. And I remember speaking to Hai in my office. He was talking to me about his father and what he owed to his father, and his father as a role model and personal example of V'gadat levincha ba'avor zeh, both in words and in deeds, that this is why we live. It's for Torah and mitzvot. And he wanted to endow a chair to Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, with whom he had so much respect and affection, in memory of his father. And what you have is the generations, Medor Ledor, of Abraham Arbesfeld to Hai Arbesfeld, to the children that are sitting here and the grandchildren that are here with us today. The generations and generations of a family that's devoted themselves to the Masorah, the Torah and mitzvos, and who have ensured thousands upon thousands of other people in our yeshiva and our talmidim, and as a force multiplier outwards, thousands and thousands more. And this is all part of our ensuring, as Rabbi Penner said, that Hai Arbesfeld and his father, Abraham, and the whole family is so core to Yeshiva University, has always been core to Yeshiva University, and remains core to Yeshiva University. And we think about him as we think about him all throughout this year, as we'll continue to think about him all throughout our years. Teinish Matot Surah B'Tzurah Chayim. This itself bounds him to eternal life, is that his bounding is tied to the Torah and to everything that is so precious that Hashem has given us.
Thank you, Rabbi Berman. Now we'd like to switch over to have our first speaker for the Kol Yom Rishon. We'd like to welcome Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Meir Goldlich, who is speaking on the topic of the stick, the snake, and the dog, the source of our redemption, past and present.
ברשות, זה פרזידנט, הרב ארי ברמן, ברשות זה דין, רבי פנר, רבנים, מוריי ורבותיי. Before we start the shiur, I would like for a minute to express my feeling to Anne, Benjamin, David, Pnina, and Michelle. I have the zchut through the years to come very close to Reb Chaim Arbesfeld, Zichrono Livracha, my wife, myself, all my children. And if I would like in 1 minute to see and to express, to show and to express what I get from Reb Chaim, is follow. God created us with 5 senses. One of the 5 is our eyes. The unique about our eyes, first, we can take from everyone almost everything. Not to eat, not to sleep, not to have freedom. One thing we cannot take from anyone, how to look of different situations, what happened to us, what happened around us. This is completely our decision. Moreover, unique about our eyes, any place what we look, this is exactly the place what we stay. Our eyes take us to the place what we look. Reb Chaim Zichrono Livracha decide all the time, in every situation, to look in positive way of the situation, to look with good eye of everything what he do, and also with good eye of other people. When the Mishnah come and say, Ezu Oshir, Asameach Bechelko, who is a rich man, what's satisfied about what we have, Reb Chaim teach us other explanation. Ezu Oshir Asameach Bechelko, he feels satisfied with other people. He's so happy when everyone succeeds. He's so happy when everyone reach every goal in his life. And every time he give shoulder, give help, give chizuk. Moreover, what unique about Reb Chaim Zichrono Livracha, every place what we look, he catch every goal. Every goal. In chesed, in tzedakah, in Torah, in ahavat Torah, in limud Torah. And this, what we take with us. Cemetery in Hebrew is Bet HaChaim. Why is Bet HaChaim? Because the personality, the soul, still alive for good forever. And we take this with us every single day. And when we stay in this special day, what here is over is very important to all the family to know Reb Chaim is with us for good forever. He come role model for us, and B'siyata Dishmaya, he will come Melitz Yosher to all of us, and Divrei Torah, what Rabbonim dedicate today, will come Lilu Nishmato, and will come Melitz Yosher of dear wife Anne and all the family, and we be zocher B'ezrat Hashem, b'mera, to bracha and to geula shlema. Chazal come and teach us, in Jewish life, every beginning and every end is very important. Soldier ready to go to the war, but one of them only engaged, but is not married, yeshuv lebeito. Somebody build house and not met Chanukah Sabayit, he go back home. Every end is very necessary. Tov achari davar mireshito. And we have many, many examples. And because we stay close to Pesach, I would like to share with you a very interesting insight. What can elevate the Pesach and put every one of us in another stage. The first miracle in the list of the miracles, and we have a lot, in Egypt, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu talked to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said, go lead Am Israel from Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ribono shel Olam, with all the respect, I don't see Jew in front of my eyes, or 40 years, or 60 years. Depends what age he leaves the palace of Paro. Age of 20, or age of 40. Now he is an age of 80. No one will care about me. No one will look of me. Kadosh Baruch Hu sent somebody else. En lo ya'aminu li. Velo yishmeu b'kuli, ki yomru lo nira elecha Hashem. They will not look of me. They will ask me, who are you? Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, what do you have in your hand? Stick? Throw the stick on the floor. Come to snake. Touch the snake. Come back to stick. You understand? Moshe Rabbeinu feel calm and say, okay, I take the mission. My first question is, how is a miracle to change the stick to snake and back to stick? Explain and give answer to Moshe Rabbeinu about his concern. He is right. No one sees his face in Egypt so many years. How we can take this mission? How is this miracle help him and give him to feel strong to take this mission? This is question number one. Question number two, later, HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to Moshe Rabbeinu, וידבר השם אל משה לאמור, בוא דבר אל פרעה. בוא דבר אל פרעה is mean, now's the time, go to the next step, go talk to Paro. And tell him to send us from Egypt. What is the reaction of Moshe Rabbeinu? וידבר משה לפני השם לאמור, אל בני ישראל לא שמעו אליי, if Am Israel don't listen to me and not care about me, איך ישמעני פרעה? פרעה for sure will never listen to me. Great קל וחומר. What הקדוש ברוך הוא answer? וידבר השם אל משה ואל אהרון, now he add also אהרון, בוא דבר אל פרעה מלך מצרים. You need to go to talk to פרעה. כמה אור החיים הקדוש שנאסק. קשה. היכן תשובת אל עליון לדברי שלוחו? משה רבינו ask very good question. Am Israel don't care, don't listen. For sure, פרעה exactly same. We not care and not listen to me. What does God say to him? You need to go. You need to go, say this to him in the beginning. Now this is your next mission. You need to go to talk to פרעה. But the way our Kadosh Baruch Hu say to him, בוא דבר אל פרעה. I feel now this is the right time to move to the next step. Go talk to פרעה. His look is mean, he leave him the option. And Moshe Rabbeinu asks good question. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu don't answer to him? Why don't answer to him? This is a question of Or HaChaim HaKadosh. And the last question, the last miracle, what we have in the way from Egypt. The last one is in the morning. When we in the way to go out from Egypt, the Torah comes and tells us, ולכל בני ישראל לא יחרץ כלב לשונו. Not any dog will jump off us and bite us. למי איש ועד בהמה למען תדעון. Why? To remember. כי יפלה השם בין מצרים ובין ישראל. הקדוש ברוך הוא divide between us to the Egyptians. I really don't understand. Why this miracle is so necessary? Because in the last year, we see this every month. Every plague what HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished the Egyptian, every one of them show us clearly how HaKadosh Baruch Hu divide between us to the Egyptians. In מכת הערוב, for example, והפליתי ביום ההוא את ארץ גושן, אשר אני עומד עליה, לבלתי להיות שם הרוב, ושמתי בדות בין עמי ובין עמך. You will see how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how God divide between us to your nation, Moshe say to Paro. And look about the devil. Exactly same, ויפלה השם בין מקנה ישראל ובין מקנה מצרים. Not one animal die. And Paro go to check, and he gets some report. You go to the ברד, ויח הברד בכל ארץ מצרים. רק בארץ גושן אשר שם בני ישראל לא היה ברד. מכת חושך. What we find? ולא ראו איש את אחיו ולא קמו איש במקומו 3 ימים. בכל ארץ מצרים. darkness. ולכל בני ישראל היה אור במושבותיהם. מכת בכורות. Every Bechor from the Egyptians passed away, died. And by us, no one. As we see, months after months, all the time, our Kadosh Baruch Hu divided between us to the Egyptians. Why we need the miracle about the dog? Not one of them jump of Am Yisrael. Why Kadosh Baruch Hu say, you will remember how I divide between you to the Egyptians. It's not necessary. We know this. We wake up with this, we see this, and we feel this. These are the three questions. And through these three questions, B'siyata Dishmaya, we see what Chazal teach us in one aspect, and this go to elevate our Pesach, and we can take this special holiday with us to all the year. Is again, short and clear, question number one. How is the miracle where the stick changed to snake and back to stick? Make Moshe Rabbeinu to feel calm and okay, I take the mission, go to lead Am Yisrael from Egypt. Question number two, when Hashem sent them to talk to Paro, Moshe Rabbeinu come and say, Am Yisrael don't listen to me. For sure, Paro will don't listen to me. Good question, good kal vachomer. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu don't answer to him? Why he recommend him we need to take the mission? Or Chaim HaKadosh asked this question. And last question, what is the necessary of the last miracle where the dogs don't jump and kill anyone or attack any one of us? And the reason is the Torah says we will remember how Hashem divided between us to the Egyptians. We know this from all the last year. Every miracle, every plague shows this to us. His explanation is follow. We know Reb Tzadok HaKohen, Maharal, Zegra, many, also Rishonim and Achronim come and tells us. Every time we want to learn any sugya, we need to see where the sugya take place in the beginning and to follow in place after place. When we talk about the snake, first time we find the snake, push Adam and his wife to eat from the tree. Second time, by Yosef HaTzadik, in the pit. והבור ריק, אין בו מים, מים אין בו, empty from water, but full with snake and scorpions. נחשים ועקרבים יש בו. Third time, by Moshe Rabbeinu, the stick changed to snake. Fourth time, before we're ready to cross Yarden River to Eretz Israel, Am Yisrael complain again. We despise the food what we have and all the difficult time what we have. We want to go back to Egypt. למה העליתונו ממצרים? כשברוך הוא says this is enough. He sent snake, Elat die. וימות עם רב מישראל, only one time in the Torah we find this kind of statement. וימות עם רב מישראל, Elat people die from the snakes. Am Yisrael understands they make major mistakes, they ask for apologize. Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu to make the snake on the stick, and everyone would still have the poison and still exist, to look and it will come okay. And my question is, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu used the same animal, the snake? He can every time attack Am Yisrael and punish Am Yisrael with other animal. Why specifically with the snake? The explanation is obviously one aspect in Chazal. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished the snake, what did he say to him? Al gechoncha telech. From now you start to walk on your stomach. ואפר תאכל כל ימי חייך. And you go to eat dust. Is בעלי המוסר come and say, אפר תאכל כל ימי חייך, is mean, I don't want to see you. You need food to stay alive, no problem. Dust is your food. You can find this any place, in the roof, in the street, in the field, any place. But what kind of punish is, al gechoncha telech. What kind of punish is to walk on the stomach. We have snakes what can walk 20 km, 20 kilometers in 1 hour. So quick, they jump, scare. What kind of punish is? The punish is if somebody walk in this stomach, he cannot walk straight. He walk in zigzag. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to divide the snake, not only for himself, also from everyone. Everyone see snake in the street, he moved to the other side. He don't want to deal with this kind of animal what is sneaky. He moved to the other side. HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to divide them completely. This snake take place in other places in the Torah. In Parshat Shmini, the Torah gives us the list of all the animals what we're not allowed to eat. And the Torah say, Kol olech al gachon, and the vav of gachon is big leather. not regular with other letters. The Gemara says in Kiddushin Lamed, this comes to teach us. Gdoile Atanoim have special title, Sofrim, Divrei Sofrim, because they count the letters and they find this is exactly the middle of the Torah. This is the middle of the Torah. Comes the Maharsha many years of Mefarshim and ask, with all the respect, take few children, middle of elementary school, take one of the shul, promise them beautiful gift, and few days, step by step, they find the Vav of Gachon. This is the middle of the letter in the Torah. How we explain the great Tanoim have titled Divrei Sofrim. Why? Because they count the letters. Children can make this in elementary school. What is so special? His explanation is follow. In life, we make many time decisions, all the time. But if somebody decide anything, because it's what he feel, understand, his perspective, what he listen, what he see, etc., is today, this is the decision. Tomorrow is a perspective change. He understand the situation differently. And when he look back, he find himself going zigzag. But if somebody bring to his life what he feel, what is important, what he see, what he care, what he understand, and he connect this to the Mesorah, what he get from his parents, and what he get from his grandparents, and what he get from his Rabbeim, guarantee he walk straight, same with the letter Vav. Comes the Torah and say to us, this is the middle of the Torah, the crossroad. What we really want, what kind of life? Life of Vav, the Gachon, what is straight, or Chas v'Chalila, life of Gachon, of zigzag. Come Moshe Rabbeinu and say, Ribono shel Olam. I can talk to Am Yisrael, they don't listen to me. They don't know who I am. Why you send me? Because Baruch Hu say to him, Moshe, what you have in your hand? Stick. Yes. Throw the stick on the land, it's come to snake. Touch the snake, come back to stick. You understand? Moshe Rabbeinu say, understand. What does it mean? Kadosh Baruch Hu say to him, if you follow what you feel, what is your understanding, what you read in the news, CNN, Fox News, etc., you're right. No one will listen to you. No Am Yisrael, nobody. But if you're following after me, you will see everyone will listen to you. What you really want to have in your hand, stick or snake? Moshe Rabbeinu say, stick. This is what I would like to have in my hand. And this steak, he eat the Egyptians, and with this steak, he split the ocean, and this thing Kodesh HaKodoshim. When we make Aliyah LaRegel, people see this and understand how we follow after HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we walk straight, yashar. Yosef stay in the pit, full with snake and scorpions. Chance to stay alive is zero. But he stay alive, he say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I understand you talk to me. I understand one day you will take me out from this place. I promise you. When I meet my brothers, I will do the best for them. You can do what you want. Before we cross Yarden River to Eretz Israel, again, Am Yisrael complain. After so many miracles in the desert, man, slav, be'er, ananei kavod, etc. They don't learn anything because Baruch Hu feels so upset. He sends a snake to attack them. What he say to Moshe Rabbeinu? Aseh lecha saraf. Sim oto al nes. Put this on the stick. והיה כל הנשוך, וראה אותו וחי, ואומר, get the poison still alive, וראה אותו וחי, וראה אותו what? Not the snake, the stick. To understand, with emunah, when we following after HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we can go straight and arrive to Eretz Israel. And this is the way. And this is what Chazal explained to us. Why the snake take so much space in the Torah? In the Torah, from the beginning of the creation until we stay close to cross Yarden River, to tell us this is all the time the decision. How we want to walk straight to follow after HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with emunah, with bitachon, or chas v'chalila, what we feel, what we understand. And it's so interesting. When Noach came out from the boat, זה פסוק say, ויחל נוח איש האדמה, ויתה כרם, וישכר, ויתגל. זה גמרא in סנהדרין, דף עין. Somebody from the Galil walk into בית המדרש. Walk into בית המדרש. And he say, you know what I found in this psukim? 13 times the letter Vav. And Rabina and Rabbi very impressed. They put it in the Shas for good forever. What does it mean? What this person say? Look in Parashat Vayeshev. Almost all the Parsha is with Vav. Look in Megillat Ruth. Except 8 psukim, every pasuk starts with the letter Vav. Is what is big deal about this psukim, what person from the Galil come and say, and Ravina and Ravashi, so impressed about this, they keep this in the Shas. The answer is, Noach, you start new life. The word is clean, is pure. Why you pick the wrong tree? Why you pick the grape tree? Why? The vineyard. This is not your tree. And the fruit would come from this. And the wine make him zigzag and he lose everything. And Chazal come and tell us in Sanhedrin, Tanya Rabbi Meir אומר, איזה אילן שאכל אדם הראשון. What kind of tree? הקדוש ברוך הוא say to אדם הראשון, don't eat from this tree, except this. You can eat from every tree. Geffen היה. Because every tree grows straight up. It goes straight up, we have a lot of fruit. You can take this. You can enjoy from the fruit. One tree is not you. It's growing in zigzags. It's exactly the way how the vineyard grow. And this is not for you. It was so nice. Adam HaRishon lose his life of this tree. Noach also lose his life on this tree. Until Avraham Avinu vayita eshel. What does it mean eshel? Eshel obviously is economies, achila, shtia, lina, livui. You open restaurant on the house. Don't forget to say bracha before and bracha after. But now we have other explanation. Vayita eshel achila. He fixed the mistake of Adam HaRishon who eat from the wrong tree. Shtia. He fixed the mistake of Lot who drink from the wrong tree. And lina. He fixed the mistake of Sdom who not accept any guest, anyone. His trees. Vayita eshel. And Yaakov Avinu the last night in Eretz Israel with all the family, he go one-way ticket. HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to him, I will bring you back. What do you need to do in the last night in Eretz Israel? To sit with all the family and to talk how we connect the family to Eretz Israel. Now the start, long golus. And what he do in this slide, he take leather and he cut branches from the tree of his grandfather and he give to every one of his children to plow and plant beside the house. This is what Chazal says in the Midrash Rabbah. What stay behind this? He said to the children, when you have difficult time in Egypt, don't forget your grandfather have more difficult time. And he following after me. And he have the emunah, the trust. Continue. Your situation is more easy for your grandfather. And he makes this. You also can make this. He gives this to you in the DNA. He gives it to every one of us. And when we leave Egypt, we take this. And what we do, we build the Mishkan from this tree. We build the house of it because to follow after HaKadosh Baruch Hu means we become part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, so nicely, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent Moshe Rabbeinu to talk to Paro, what he say to him? Am Yisrael don't listen to me. For sure, Paro don't go to listen to me. It's no question. Good Kal Vachomer, come Or HaChaim HaKadosh and ask, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu don't give him answer? He recommend him. Look the pasuk carefully. What the pasuk say? Bo daber el Paro melech Mitzrayim. Go talk to him and ask him to give us permission to leave Egypt. Vayidaber Moshe lifnei Hashem le'emor. Am Yisrael don't listen to me. For sure, Paro don't go to listen to me. Vayidaber Moshe lifnei Hashem. In Hebrew, it's not right to say lifnei Hashem. In Hebrew, you need to say Vayidaber Moshe el Hashem. It comes the Natziv and say to us so nicely, לא הזכיר אל השם. מה זה וידבר משה לפני השם? לא מצינו לעולם. We never find in the Torah, משה רבנו talk to Hashem. Except one time, יפקוד השם אלוקי הרוחות איש על העדה, before he passed away, who is comes the next leader, הקדוש ברוך הוא, you will pick him. Is what is mean לפני השם? לא היה דיבור אל השם, אלא מדבר לעצמו. וידבר משה, he said to himself, 1 minute, because Baruch sent me now to talk to Paro. If Am Yisrael don't listen, for sure Paro also don't listen. It's no question. Immediately he give answer to himself. Because Baruch Hu answered to me this question. On the miracle how the snake changed to snake and back to stick. This was answer to me to any time when I have dilemma, any time when I have struggle, what is right, what is wrong, what I feel, or to do something else, what I don't see anyway. Yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu are following after you. Is we understand why is the first miracle in on the list of the miracles, what happened to us in Egypt, to leave Egypt, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed the stick to snake and back to stick. Step A, to any succeed, to any siyata dishmaya, to get freedom is emunah b'Kadosh Baruch Hu. Emunah and bitachon and to trust the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Afal sometimes the picture don't look so clear, or maybe look opposite, to trust the Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is step A. The last miracle, what happened, is about the dog. They not jump and attacked us. Why? To remember we leave Egypt. To remember we leave Egypt. And to remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu divide between us to the Egyptians. Sorry, we know this. Like after one after the other shows this to us. What kind of miracle is not necessary. It's not come to teach us anything. The answer is, when we look in Chazal about the dog, what we find about the dog. First, in Perek Shira, we find the last animal, Perek Shira, talk all the universal, say thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, appreciate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everyone have his pasuk, and every time the challenge is to find the connection between the pasuk to the animal, to the trees, to the bird, etc. The last one is the dog. What's the pasuk? כלבים מה אומרים? בואו נשתחווה ונכרעה נברכה לפני השם משה. בואו נשתחווה. This means we bow down to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But in the same time, we find about the dog in Yeshayahu, וכלבים עזי נפש. It's a very strong animal. אז שבחיות כלבים זה גמרא כמתזס. Dog can jump and rip people a few minutes and finish. Is how can happen? They say bow nishtachave, to bow down, and same time they're so strong and take big risk. The answer is the Maharsha tells us in Sanhedrin Tzadik Zayin why dog in Hebrew is kelev. The answer is kulo lev. It's completely loyalty to the owner. And if he jump and rip somebody to save the life of his owner, kulo lev la'adon. This is unique about the dog. The dog, how בעל הקיידה come and teach us. אם הכרת הטוב תיבטל מן העולם, if the dog represent הכרס הטוב, if הכרת הטוב תיבטל מן העולם, we not have this concept, ידוע על מה העולם, אם כן על מה העולם עומד. הקדוש ברוך הוא, בעל הקיידה come and say, give us everything for free. You don't need from us. You have everything. אף על פי שעשה זאת שלא על מנת לקבל פרס, ואף על פי שעשה זאת מכל מקום, טבע העניין, הקדוש ברוך הוא building bias, nature, שיקבל מברואיו שכר ראוי. הקדוש ברוך הוא want for us, we will pay him back. How? הכרס החסד, הכרס הטוב, ומזה לא מנע עצמו מלקבלו. הקדוש ברוך הוא say, this I look for to get from עם ישראל, ואדרבה, ביקשו מהם מידין. And look the last line of בעל הקדה, what kind of statement he say, לפי שהגורע חוקו בזה, if somebody don't ever הכרת הטוב, מציאותו לבטלה. All his essence is for nothing. This is הכרת הטוב, and so interesting to understand this. Moshe Rabbeinu, great leader. 40 years in the desert, he have one question what he asked himself day after day. How can happen? Am Israel sees so many miracles. In Egypt, when we go out from Egypt, split the ocean, Kabbalat Torah, face to face with God. And from time to time, they complain about something else. And they complain. How can happen? And he say to them, and the Gemara come and teach us, in Avodah Zarah of A, before he passed away, he said to Am Yisrael, you remember Kabbalat Torah? For sure. What happened? God started to talk to us, Anochi velo yeh, and you in shock. You come and say to me, Moshe Rabbeinu said to Am Yisrael, Daber ata imanu, please talk to us. Not HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Penny daber imanu pen amut, because Baruch go to talk to us, and our life is over. We're so scared, we're so worried. Moshe Rabbeinu, no, what I need to do now? He asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered to him? What he say to him? מי ייתן והיה לבבם זה ליראה אותי כל הימים. Wow, I'm so excited, so happy. הלוואי, I hope this kind of יראת שמיים, what they have now, will stay with them all the time. You remember I told you? Moshe Rabbeinu said to him, for sure. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, מי ייתן, הלוואי, I hope this will stay for good. What you need to do? You need to say on the spot, what does it mean? Who will give? You can give. Nobody else. Ten ata, give us this kind of Yirat Shamayim. And you know why you don't ask this Yirat Shamayim? You know why you don't say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please give us? Because you know if you will say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give. And if you will give, you will need to say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thank you, not only 3 times, 6 times, 7 times a day. You say HaKadosh Baruch Hu will also respect 3 times a day to say to you, thank you, this is enough. It's scary what I say to you. But what I can do, Tosfot says this word by word. And the language of the Tosfot is, כפויי טובה. לכך קראם כפויי טובה, שלא רצו לומר, אתה תן. They don't want to say, give us. לפי שלא היו רוצים להחזיק לו טובה בכך. If we will give, we need to give him more הכורס הטוב. It's too much. It's not good. A little bit is good. What we do is right. Is Moshe Rabbeinu shows them how this point brings them to lose a lot and to complain from time to time. Now we understand. Im kach, we go to the next step and listen very carefully. Mamash, pilei playim. In Perek Shira, we have other animals what relate to us. And this is the zehev, the wolf. What kind of posuk belong to him? על כל דבר פשע, על שור, על חמור, על שא, על שלמה, על כל אבדה אשר יאמר כי הוא זה, עד האלוהים יבוא דבר שניהם, אשר ירשיון אלוהים ישלם שניים לרעהו. posuk will talk about shomer chinam. How does this relate to the wolf, to the zev? What is shomer chinam? Shomer chinam is person, what his reputation is par excellence. Par excellence. All the neighborhood, all the city say, this kind of man, you can trust him. You can give him to watch for you, money, jewelry, document, everything. He don't take penny, everything is great. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable reputation we have. One day, somebody come and ask him, please, can I get back what I give you to watch for me? The money is jewelry, it's a document. You don't give me anything. What do you mean? I give you. No, you don't give me. They go to the court and they find, he steal. It means he used a reputation. He used a reputation, what the community, what the town give him to steal. It means this is terribly kfiyut tova. This הכורת הטוב. This is the zev. And Chazal come and tells us, Gemara bebroches, Yud Gimel. Somebody walk in the way, פגע בו זאב. זאב attacked him. And thank God he survived. He said to everyone the miracle what happened to him. פגע בו ארי, lion, tried to attack them, and thank God he survived again with big miracle. פגע בו נחש, and thank God he survived. And he says the last miracle what happened. כך ישראל, צרות אחרונות, משכחות את הראשונות. Comes the Maharsha and say, why does the Gemara bring this kind of animals? And Maharsha says, Ze'ev represent Mitzrayim. Aryeh represent Bavel, etc. Why Ze'ev represent Mitzrayim? Because the essence of the Egyptian, this Akaras HaTov, Kfiyut Tova. Who makes them special nation? Who puts them in the map? The strong economy nation all over the world. Yosef HaTzadik, Yaakov Avinu, ויקום מלך חדש אשר לא ידע את יוסף. זה terribly כפיות טובה. Now listen, the Mishnah come and teach us in ברוכס. ממתי קוראים קריאת שמע בשחרית? Everyone know from the חיידר? מי שיכיר בין תכלת ללבן. תניא רבי מאיר אומר, מי שיכיר בין זאב לכלב. When we know to divide between זאב what represent כפיות טובה, כלב, what represent הכעס הטוב. קבלת עול מלכות שמיים, we know the concept of הכעס הטוב. How is it necessary to grow and to build? This is the last miracle what stay with us when we live in Egypt. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes this miracle, we ask, why we need this miracle? All the years we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu divide between us to the Egyptian. The answer is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for us, when we leave Egypt, not only to say what happened in Egypt, what we see in Egypt. He wants what we take from Egypt. What we take with us from Egypt. What we take, this concept of Hakaras HaTov. And this cross all the holiday of Pesach. And this is the essence of this time. The first miracle is the Emunah Bitochon, through the snake and the stick. The last miracle is Hakaras HaTov. I believe and I feel, and we see this every one of us. This two aspect was in front of the eyes of Reb Chaim ben Avrom, Zichrono Livracha. The Emunah, the trust. Kadosh Baruch Hu, we walk with you. With a smile what you have all the time, when you talk to everyone, we walk. And this what also bring him all the time to say again and again, the tremendous Hakaras HaTov. Hakaras HaTov to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hakaras HaTov to Yeshiva Sabinu Yitzchak Elchon, and Hakaras HaTov to everyone. Is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu take his soul so close to Pesach. Is mean what we take from his Chaim, from his Chayut, these two aspects. In the beginning, step A of redemption from Egypt is the essence of the miracle between the snake and the snake. Yirat Shamayim and Bitachon and trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the last one is Hakaras HaTov. We will take this with us, is B'siyata Dishmaya. He will come a little to every one of us. And we be zoche, in Mirza Hashem, when we see how the year look last year and how the look here now, tremendous Hakaras HaTov to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how with all the sadness, with all the difficult time, how everything changed, Baruch Hashem, to the right way, and Bezat Hashem will be zoche in this year to end Galti Etchem Acharit Kereshit.
Thank you, Rav Govlicht. I'm excited to next introduce Dr. Benjy Arversfeld. Dr. Benjy, like many family members of the Arbesfeld family, and I'm sure many of you listening to the shiurim today on Zoom, is someone who went through the Y system from high school on, just like his father, Zichrono Bracha. He will now share some words on behalf of himself and the Arbesfeld family.
Bereshus. I can't. Good.
It is working. We can't.
Okay. All right. Bereshus, President Rabbi Dr. Berman, Dean of Reitz, Rabbi Penner, distinguished Roshei HaYeshiva, Rabbanim, family and friends. On behalf of my mother, she should be well, and my entire family, I would like to thank everyone for joining today's special Yom Rishon program, L'zecha Nishmas, my father, Rav Chaim ben Avram, Zichrono Livracha, whose first yurtzeit was yesterday, Zion Nisan. I can think of no other venue that would be more fitting to memorialize my father than the Kolo Yom Rishon, which he dedicated in memory of his parents, my grandparents, and which he loved to personally attend whenever he could. My father was born in the Bronx in 1931, and though he attended Yeshiva Salanter as a youth, in a sense, his life began in 1945 when he entered the halls of Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, first as a high school student, then as a student in Yeshiva College, and ultimately learning for smicha as a Talmud of the Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, Zechet Tzaddik Livracha. And though my father left the yeshiva in 1956, after receiving smicha, he never really ever left the yeshiva. Anyone who knew my father would quickly learn of his overwhelming gratitude for the transformative experience that the yeshiva had on his life. His mission was to assume an obligation for Hakaras HaTov to the yeshiva that was so dear in his heart and so deep in his soul. My father had tremendous respect and admiration for all the Roshei HaYeshiva, and his makir tov for Rabbanim was unparalleled. But I want to particularly thank Rabbi Dr. Berman, Harav Penner, and the three Roshei HaYeshiva speaking today, all of whom had a unique and personal relationship with my father. In the order of their speaking, Harav Meir Goldvicht, Harav Herschel Schechter, and Harav Michael Rosenzweig. On behalf of my family, I want to thank you for the extraordinary kavod your participation brings to this zikaron. I would like to conclude by again thanking all of you for joining this special Kol Yom Rishon tribute to my father, and I wish you all a Chag Kosher v'Sameach.
Thank you, Dr. Benjy, for sharing those words. May his neshama have an aliyah. I'd like to welcome Rav Herschel Schechter, a Ritz Rosh Yeshiva, who will be speaking on Inyanei Pesach.
Yeshiva is learning Psachim this year, and the Gemara in Psachim has an interesting line on Daf Nun Amud Aleph. The Gemara talks about people who go to Olam Haba. So the Gemara has an expression, Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmuda b'Yadai. So the pshat in the Gemara is a person should review his learning. So when he goes to the Olam HaEmes, he'll have everything in his mind. But I was told last year when Rabbi Arbesfeld passed away that he left instructions during his lifetime that when they bury him, they should bury his Gemara Chulin with him. Literally, Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmuda b'Yadai, the word tzaddikim, the word Talmidei Chachamim, who left such instructions. His Gemara Chulin with the Yoreh Deah, and that's what he learned by Rab Soloveitchik. That's what stood out most in his mind. My special connection with Rabbi Arbesfeld was that for many years, the Rav, Rab Soloveitchik, used to give a shir in Manhattan in the Maria Synagogue. Those of you who remember, it was a rented room, rented office space in an office building on Broadway and 80th Street every Tuesday night. So a group of Balabatim would come every Tuesday night. A lot of people would come from out of town. People had to be in New York for business. They would make sure they'd be in New York on a Tuesday to attend the Tuesday night shir. So Rabbi Arbesfeld was one of that group. And when a little over 40 years ago, when Rab Soloveitchik, first he learned Gemara Brachas for over 10 years. Then he learned Gemara Megillah for quite a few years. Then he learned a little bit Tainus. Then he started Sanhedrin, the Beis Amud Aleph, and he said it's too difficult for him. It's too much for him. He's training himself too much. So he discontinued this year. So a group of Balabatim, and I think Berosham was Rabbi Arbesfeld, contacted me and they asked me to continue this year. So this is over 40 years that I give this year, the Queen Shir. The group of Balabatim purchased the Gemara Sanhedrin from the Shul Maria, and they started the shir in Queens. So that started my special relationship with Rabbi Arbesfeld. And over the years, he was extremely helpful to me and to a few other Rabbeim in the Yeshiva to see to it that we made a reasonably decent parnasa, Baruch Hashem. And of course, he felt so indebted to the Yeshiva for everything. I was thinking that maybe we have an idea. Divrei Harav, Divrei HaTalmud, Divrei Misham, and I'm sure Rabbi Arbesfeld and many of you would rather listen to things that Rab Soloveitchik said rather than listen to what I have to say. So I prepared a few inyanim on Sfiras HaOmer. The Gemara in Menachos Daf Samach Vav has a machloikis where the Sfiras HaOmer Bizman Hazeh is a din deraisa or a din derabanan. Why should it be a din derabanan? Well, the dinim in the Chumash are dinim deraisa. So the Pashup Pshat is because you start counting Sfira from the day that you bring the Minchas HaOmer. So Bizman Shein Beis Hamikdash Kaim, there is no Minchas HaOmer. So Rab Soloveitchik used to say that Rab Chaim thought that that cannot be the pshat. What happens if one year, for some reason or another, they weren't able to bring the Minchas Ha'omer Bizman HaMikdash? So you mean to say that if there was an Einus and they didn't bring the Minchas Ha'omer, so that year Sfiras Ha'omer would only be the Rabbanan? So Rab Chaim thought that it didn't make any sense. So why should there be an opinion that Sfiras Ha'omer Bizman is the Rabbanan? So Rab Chaim thought that it depends on the chiyuv minchas ha'omer. So what's the issue whether Sfiras Ha'omer today is the Raisa the Rabbanan? So he said that depends whether the Kedushas HaMikdash is Kitshel L'Shaita the Kitshel L'Asilavai, or we assume that after the Churban Abayis, like Kitshel L'Asilavai. If the Malkam HaMikdash retains its Kedusha even after the Churban Abayis, so then theoretically it's possible to be Makrid Minchas Ha'omer today. The Arabs won't let us. Okay, it'll start a world war over there. But theoretically there is a chiyuv to bring Minchas Ha'omer today. So that's where Rab Chaim suggested that perhaps the machlokes halacha l'maisa between Tosfos and the Rambam in Shulchan Aruch, the accepted opinion is like Tosfos, that Sfiras Ha'omer Bizman is as the Rabbanan. And the commentaries all point out that from the Rambam would appear that his opinion is that Sfiras Ha'omer Bizman is the Raisa, that nothing changed. So Rab Chaim suggested that maybe this is L'Shitosam, that the Shitas HaRambam clearly is in Hilchas Beis HaBchira, that the Malkam HaMikdash retained its Kedusha even after the Churban Abayis. So today there's still a chiyuv to bring Minchas Ha'omer. We can't do it because there's an Einus, but just like Bizman Abayis, if there would be an Einus, since there was a chiyuv to bring Minchas Ha'omer, so there should be a chiyuv minater to count Sfira. And the Balei HaTosfos perhaps were of the opinion that like Kitshel L'Asilavai, so there's no chiyuv to bring Minchas Ha'omer today. Then Rab Soloveitchik suggested another possibility, that even if one were to assume that according to the Balei HaTosfos, Malkam HaMikdash is Kitshel L'Asilavai, it's a machlokes Tanaim and a machlokes in the Gemara, and a machlokes the Rambam and the Rabbi had a paskin whether Kitshel L'Asilavai, like Kitshel L'Asilavai. So the Gemara says that if Malkam HaMikdash is Kitshel L'Asilavai, then makriv and afal pi shein bayis, you're able to be makriv korban. You need a mizbeach, but you don't need the whole Beis HaMikdash in a state of that it should be bonui. So even if one should hold makriv and afal pi shein bayis, there's a famous line in the Sefer HaChinuch that makriv and afal pi shein bayis means that it's only a reshus, it's not a chayva. The Galatiana Achronim came up with this without realizing that there was such a line in the Sefer HaChinuch. So I thought it was a Galatiana Pshetel, that it was a Loinit on the Hayama, but then I saw the Stipler in the Sefer Answachim quotes Sefer HaChinuch writes like that. And this idea of Harem is a few difficult Rambam, so there's a possibility that the Rambam also holds like that. Makriv min al pi shein bayis doesn't mean that you're obligated to bring the korbanos, just means that you're permitted to bring the korbanos. Rab Soloveitchik suggested maybe the mechayiv to count Sfiras Ha'omer deraisa is not the actual Hakravas Minchas Ha'omer, but the chiyuv, like Rab Chaim suggested. And even if one should assume that, according to Tosfos, Kitshel L'Asilavai, but it's permissible to bring the Minchas Ha'omer, but you're not obligated to. So one could say that if you're not obligated, it's the chiyuv to bring Minchas Ha'omer that's mechayiv to count Sfira. But if there's no chiyuv bismanas, it's only a reshus, then there's room to say that Sfiras Ha'omer is only the Rabban. So this is perhaps the machlokes, the Rambam and Tosfos, whether the chiyuv Sfiras Ha'omer Bizman Hazeh is the Raisa, the Rabbanan. In the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber quotes from the Rabbi. The Rabbi is one of the Balei HaTosfos. Once in a while, Tosfos quotes from the Rabbi. The Rabbi has the following shaila. A person says the bracha, Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, and he thought today was the 18th day of Sfira. Then by the time he gets to the end of the bracha, he realizes, no, today's the 19th day. So he says correctly, today's the 19th day. So the shaila is, but at the beginning when he said the Shema Malchus, he thought that he's going to say 18. And then he ends up by saying 19. So the Rabbi relates this to the topic discussed in the Gemara and Brachas at the end of the first parak. Person has a cup of beverage in front of him. He thought that it was wine. So he starts the bracha, Baruch Hashem, Elokeinu melech ha'olam, al da'as, thinking that he's going to end off and say, Bore pri hagofim. Then when he realizes that it's not wine, and if he says it's beer, he's going to say Bore pri hagofim, he won't be yotze anything. It'll be a bracha levatala. So he corrects himself, And he says, Sha'akol niyeh b'dvara. So the Gemara has an Ibayah Dalep. There are different interpretations in the suffix. That's the Pashim Shai. So the Gemara has a suffix since at the time that he said the Shem Malchus, the beginning of the bracha, he thought that he's going to end up by Piagofim, which would not be a valid bracha, even though he corrected himself and the text of the bracha was perfect. He said from the beginning to the end, Shakol niyeh b'dvara. This is an Ibayah Dalep sheet in the Gemara. So how do we paskin? So Taisus on that Gemara quotes from the Rif that Safik bracha is lahakel. Safik bracha is lahakel because bracha is only the Rabbanan. Once in a while, when you have a bracha that's the Raisa, let's say in Shulchan Aruch it says if a person ate a filling meal, he ate kedei sviyah, and then he's a little tipsy and he doesn't remember whether he recited bichas hamazon or not. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch, Safik bracha is lahachmer because that's a Safik deraisa lechumer. But if he didn't eat kedei sviyah, or any other bracha that's only the Rabbanan, so then you say Safik brachas lahakel. So the Rabbi Yoas adds on that it's only because Sfiras Ha'imeh Bizman Hazeh is the Rabbanan, that's why we paskin Safik brachas lahakel. But if the Shaila would have occurred Bizman HaMigdal, Rabbi Yoas from the Bali HaTosfos, they assume, like it says in the Maskanas HaGemara and in Menachos Dav Samach Vav, that Sfiras Ha'imeh Bizman Hazeh is only the Rabbanan. So the Rabbi Yos says if this Shaila would have come up as Ban Abayis, that he starts the bracha Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, al das to count 18, and then he corrects himself and he says 19, we would say Safik brachas lahachme because Sfiras Ha'imeh Bizman HaMigdash is their rice. So this is a Peladike Rabbi Yos. They quote in the notes of Rabbi Soloveitchik on the Gemara Menachos, on that Gemara. Rabbi said he doesn't understand. The Nusach HaBracha is exactly identical. When you say 18 and 19, the bracha is the same. Al Sfiras Ha'imeh, that's the end of the bracha. It's same whether it's 18 or 19. It's not like Bar Piagofen Sha'akol niyeh b'dvara, that if you would end up Bar Piagofen on beer, on shichra, he wouldn't be yotzeh. But here it's the exact same text of the bracha. So what does it have to do with the Gemara in the end of the first parak and bracha? So Rabbi, they quote Rabbi asked the kasha and he didn't have a teretz. So Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out that the Bir Agra asks the kasha and gives the teretz. The Bir Agra not sif in Shulchan Aruch. Bir Agra writes that everybody has one, when you look in a normal siddur, so the siddur says, he said, bracha shekashem tason al sfiras ha'imah, everybody says amen. Then you say, hayom yamechad ba'imah, hayom shnei yamim ba'imah. The Rav Yoah writes that you don't say like that, you don't answer amen after al sfiras ha'imah. The sfiras ha'imah mitzvah is fulfilled in the form of a bracha. That you add a shit and you say, Asher Kadeshanim mitzvos v'tzvan al sfiras ha'imah, sheh hayom yom echad ba'imah, and everybody answers amen after you finish the sfira. There are some mitzvahs that you fulfill in the form of a bracha. Let's say Kiddush. You recite, you mention that today is a holy day, Shabbos and Yom Tov is a holy day, a special day, unique. Everything is different, Mikora brachas, and you fulfill a mitzvah of Kiddush in the form of a bracha. So the Rabbi Yoah is of the opinion that Sfiras Ha'imah is fulfilled in the form of a bracha. So it comes out, if you plant, and if you hear somebody counting Sfir, you don't say Amen after he finishes Al Sfiras Ha'imah. You're in the middle of the bracha. You only say Amen after he finishes Shehayom Yamechad Ba'imah, then you say Amen. Because the mitzvah of Sfiras Ha'imah is fulfilled in the form of a bracha. So it comes out that if he thought he's going to count 18, he was going to end off the bracha by saying 18. And when he corrects himself and he finds out that it's 19, he ends up the bracha by saying today's the 19th day. So it's exactly the same as the Nusach, the same as the Shaila and the Gemara. He thought that it was a cup of wine. He was going to say Bar Piagofim. Then he corrects himself and he ends off Shakol niyeh b'dvara. The Chsimas HaBracha doesn't correspond to what he thought he was going to say when he said the Shem HaMalchus. Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out that the Bir Agra asks the kasha and gives the teretz. Rabbi Soloveitchik had his famous interpretation in the sheet of the Bahag, the Bali HaTosfos, and other Rishonim quote from the Sefer Halachas Gedolos. Every so often, Tosfos will quote something from the Bahag. They don't really agree with Bahag, but they don't think that it's right. But out of respect, the Bahag lived in the days of the Gaonim. So out of respect for the Bahag, they don't want to violate his opinion. So take, for example, by women reading the Megillah for men. So the Bahag understood in the Gemara, women are obligated to read the Megillah, but the obligation of the women is not on the same level as the obligation of the men. And therefore, if the din, let's say a child before Bar Mitzvah will read the Megillah to be motzi an adult. So that's a machlokes hatanoim. In the Mishnah, we assume machlokes Rabbeinu Chachamim. In the Mishnah Megillah, we assume that a cotton has a lower level chiyuv. The cotton is only mechuyev mitam chinuch. He's a trader rabbanon, and everybody else is a chader rabbanon. The way Tosfos presents it. So the cotton is considered eina mechuyev b'davar. He cannot be moitzi the adults who are a chader rabbanon. So the same over here, the Bahag had a chiddush that a woman is obligated to read the Megillah, but the women are not on the same level chiyuv as the men. So therefore, a woman cannot be moitzi men. So we really don't pass like the Bahag. When you have a difficult situation, a big shas hatchak, and the only way that a man can be moitzi mikra Megillah is his wife is going to read for him. So we pass kamika din that it is good against the Bahag. Well, chatchila, we always avoid that out of respect for the Bahag. So the same here by Sfira Sam. The Bahag came up with a big chiddush that since it says Sheva Shabbos Tmimais, so the Gemara has a discussion. What is the expression Tmimais teach us? What halacha is that? So the Gemara says the word Tmimais teaches us that the Sfira should be balayla as opposed to bayom. Every day on the calendar consists of two parts. First you have the nighttime, then you have hayom hailach achar halayla. So if people will count Sfira in the daytime, so the Sfira will only be chal on that half of the day on the calendar. It will only be chal on the daytime, it won't be chal on the nighttime. And it then requires tmima as much of the day as possible should be included in the Sfira Saimer. In fact, there's a further machlokes, Rav Soloveitchik pointed out, further machlokes, should you count Sfira as early as possible in the night? So as many minutes, as many hours, and as many minutes of the whole 24-hour unit of the calendaric day should be included in the Sfira. That's how Tosfos says. And Tosfos says that Bisman Hazeh, since Sfira Saim is only the Rabbanon, so someone would count Bein Hashmashos who would be Yotze because Feika the Rabbanon the Kula. So we would recommend that today, L'chatchila, since B'di'eved it's good, so we would recommend L'chatchila, you should count during Bein Hashmashos every day, every night. Why? In order to have the full 24 hours as much as possible included in the Sfira. And Rav Soloveitchik pointed out from the Rambam, it would appear not so, that there's no Midas Chasidus to count as early as possible. Let's say a person, the boys in the Yeshiva daven at the 10 o'clock minyan at night. So they're going to count Sfira after 10 o'clock. So in the Shulchan Aruch it says, after Tzeisak Kaham, you should count earlier. Why should you wait till 10 o'clock? It's already going to be Tzeisak Kaham at 9 o'clock. Before 9 o'clock, it's going to be 8:30, it'll be Tzeisak Kaham, before 8:30. So count as early as possible. So he pointed out this machlokes Tosfos and the Rambam, that you want to have as much of the day included in the Sfira as possible, whether it means you should have the unit of night and the unit of the day, or you should have as many minutes as possible. It appears in Hilchos Shabbos as well. The Gemara says you should recite Kiddush Leil Shabbos. If you didn't recite Kiddush Leil Shabbos, you recite Kiddush in the day of Shabbos. And the Ramban al Torah on Parshas Yisro, on the pasuk Zachar Sham Shabbos Lakatshay, writes that reciting Kiddush on Shabbos, in a certain sense, is Mekadesh the Yom HaShabbos. The Shabbos is clear l'kaima from Sheishis Mei Bereishis, but when we recite Kiddush, we are endowing Shabbos with an additional level of Kedusha b'dei Adam. It had Kedusha b'dei Shamayim, clear l'kaima from Sheishis Mei Bereishis. But when we recite Kiddush, the Ramban compares it to the Kiddush Mishnasa Chamishim Shana, that the Bez Nagorel endows the Shnasa Yovel with Kedusha. So we should endow the Shabbos, even though the Shabbos already has Kedusha b'dei Shamayim, we should recite Kiddush and endow Shabbos with an additional level of Kiddush. So the Gemara says you should say Kiddush balayla rather than wait till the daytime. So does this mean you should recite Kiddush at night, so both the night and the day are included in your act of Kiddush? Or does it mean you should recite Kiddush as early as possible at night? A lot of people come home and they sing Shalom Aleichem and they sing Yeshes Chayil and they sing all kinds of piyutim before they get to say Kiddush. Is that right? And they give their children brachas. They do a lot of things before they say Kiddush. So in the Shulchan Aruch, they quote that one should recite Kiddush as early as possible in the night, just like by Sfira Sa'imer. Shulchan Aruch quotes the Shitas Balei HaTosfos. Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out that the two seem to be not identical, but very similar. The Tosfos sheet is by the Sfira Sa'imer, you should include as many minutes as possible of the 24-hour unit of the day of Sfira. So the same by Kiddush, you should be Mekadosh as much of the 24 hours as possible. And recite Kiddush as early as possible. You can say the Shalom Aleichem with the Eshes Chayil after the Kiddush. You can say it after you say Amoitzi also. Mashenik in the Rambam seems, no, as long as you say Kiddush Balayla, you've included both the Laila and the Yom in the reciting of Kiddush. And by Sfira Sam, it should be Balayla. So the Gemara says that the word Tamimas means that the Sfira should be Chal on both the Laila and the Yom. The Bahag came up with a new idea that Tamimas means that if you missed one day, all the days together constitute one big Hemshech, and Tamimas requires that you shouldn't even miss one day. So we don't really paskin like the Bahag, but out of respect for the Bahag, so we leave out the bracha. So that's why if there's any other tzad suffix, let's say one forgot to count Sfira Balayla, then there's a machlokes and Rishonim whether you count by Yom. So we would count by Yom, bali bracha, suffix lechumra. Why not? If Sfira Sam is the rice, suffix the rice lechumra, even Mr. Rabbanan, you have nothing to lose over here. So we would count Sfira by Yom bali bracha, and then the next night we would continue to count with a bracha, because it's not outright in contradiction to the Bahag. So it doesn't constitute such a bizoyan that we're going against the Bahag. So this is the famous opinion of the Baal Halachas Gedolos that Tamimus adds on a din that if you missed one day, you lose your opportunity to count. So the Minchas China has a famous shaila. What about a cotton shehigdil in the middle of the Sfira? I have 3 sons, so one of my sons was born in the middle of Sfira, so he had that shaila. Cotton shehigdil, so the counting of Sfira that he did before he becomes bar mitzvah was only on a level of the Rabbanon. So later on, after he becomes bar mitzvah, can he continue to count with a bracha? If the Sfira before was only on a level of the Rabbanon, is there still a din of chinuch after a person becomes bar mitzvah? There's still a din of chinuch. So he's mechuyev to count with the Rabbanim mitam chinuch. Maybe I should say, no, there's no chinuch on a gadol. Either the gadol is mechuyev mikra din, or he's not mechuyev. There's no chinuch on a gadol. So, and if you hold that it's only, if you hold that that there's no chinuch after the child becomes bar mitzvah, then the question is whether the counting when he was cotton is zayla or not. Does that help to be considered tamimus? Because on the level of the rice, he wasn't mechuyev to count before. Or let's say the Neri Yehuda is quoted by the Shari Tshuva, and that's Simon Asfira Saima Tov Peites. Neri Yehuda has a shaila. What if someone is in Einan? Somebody died in the middle of Sfira, so the relatives are owning him. So an Einan is not permitted to fulfill any mitzvahs. So he's going to miss Sfira Saima one night, maybe even more than one night. So if one is in Aninas and he missed Sfira Saima, so do you say he's not allowed to do any mitzvahs? There's a machlekes Rashi and Tosas where the Einan is potter from doing mitzvahs, so he's forbidden. So we're machma like Tosas, the Einan is forbidden from doing mitzvahs. So if he's not going to count Sfira, it's going to affect the future. Even after the Aninas is going to be over, he's only going to be earning 1 or 2 days. After the Aninas is over, he won't be able to say a bracha on the Sfira Saima. So the Nari Yehuda raises the possibility, maybe the din that the Einan is not allowed to do mitzvahs is only with respect to mitzvahs that are relevant today, right now. But if there's a mitzvah that if it's going to affect the future also, then maybe then the Einan is mechuyev to count Sfira. So Rab Soloveitchik thought regarding both of the issues, the Minchas China Sofik regarding a cotton and the Dion and Yehuda regarding the Einan, he thought that Pshat and the Bahag was not the way the Pri Megadim understood, that since that the Bahag thinks just like the Rambam writes, a Dalam Minim Shebelulav, the Mishnah says in Menachas Dalam Minim Shebelulav Ma'akvim Zeh. The Romi Akiv, if you don't have the Esrog, the Lulav, Hadasman, Arabis, that you don't say a bracha, you don't shake the lulav, there's no kiyum at all. So the Pri Megadim understood that that's Pshat and the Bahag. The Bahag understood Tamimus teaches you that all the 49 spheres are one big mitzvah. So they thought not necessarily so. He thought maybe the Pshat and the Bahag was different. He just meant to say that you have to have hamshechas, you have to have hamshechiyos, you have to have continuation in the count. If you didn't count 18, how can you count 19? You have to have a hemshech. And the Ikar Adin, Rov HaRishonim don't agree with the Bahag. So he said the Loshen in the Sefer HaChinuch, when he rejects the Bahag, most of the Rishonim reject the Bahag, but just out of respect for the Bahag, because he was from the days of the Goyim, so that's why we leave out the bracha. So the Loshen of the Sefer HaChinuch is, we pasken that he does count, and he says the bracha monem kol Yisrael. He continues to count, but the rest of the Jewish nation, what does that mean? this issue, how can you count 19 if you didn't count 18? There's no Hemshechius. So he says, no, all of Klal Yisrael counted 18 last night. This person didn't count. The people in this community, there was some einus, all the people in this community didn't count. But the people, the Jewish people in the rest of the world did count. So there is Hemshechius. So that's what Rambam Soloveitchik said. If the Kotten counted, there's certainly a Kiyum. So even if he say on the level of the Raisa, he wasn't the Chuyev, but he was counting. So he can, let's say, he becomes bar mitzvah on the 18th day of Sfira. He counted the first 17 days. Even if you say on the level of the Raisa, he wasn't the Chuyev, and the Kotna does a mitzvah, the Katnusa doesn't help for later on the Gadlusai. But over here, he doesn't have to do it b'Torah's mitzvah. He was counting the first 18 days, and then there is a continuation in his counting. The same Rabbi Soloveitchik said regarding the Einan. He says, Lamaisa, the same as in Rabbi Yehuda, but for a different explanation. That Rabbi Yehuda was mesupik, whether the Einan is potter, Einan is not allowed to do any mitzvahs. Does that only apply to mitzvahs that are only relevant right now? Or what about a mitzvah like Sfir Saima? If I won't count today, this will ruin my opportunity to continue to count the rest of the days with a bracha. So that Rabbi Yehuda Misafek recommended maybe he should sail Sfira without a bracha, because maybe he is mechuyev to it. So Soloveitchik said no, it's all sign that he's not allowed to fulfill the mitzvah. He should count today's day. If he's in Einan on the 18th, he should say today's the 18th day of Sfira with kavanah shalolotzes. But he counted, so there's no hapsaka in the minyan. There is a continuation, and there's a hemshechius in his counting. We all know that by the Hasidim, they don't count Sfira before the Seder. By the Mistagnim, they count Sfira right after Ma'ariv, the second night of Pesach, and then they have the Seder. And by the Hasidim, they don't count Sfira till after the Seder is over. That's why many Haggadahs, they have printed the Sfira Saimer after the whole Seder is over on the second night of Pesach. So this is a pella. How can you eat before you tzel Sfira? The din is you're not allowed to eat before you do because chametz, the Gemara says. The Mishnah says in Sukkah, you're not allowed to eat before you bench esrog. You're not allowed to eat before you listen to Tkiyah Shofar. Yeah. So how can they eat? What's their insistence? Dafka on eating the food by the Seder, having the Seder before Sfira Sayim. So in the Hasidic Svarim, they give a reason based on the Zohar. That the Zohar raises a question: why don't we recite Halal Shalom on Shvi Shal Pesach Zecher L'Nes of Kriyas Yamsuf? Kriyas Yamsuf occurred on Shvi Shal Pesach. So all the other days of Pesach, the Gemara says, Sukkot he say Halal Shalom every day because Chalukim and Korban the same. Whatever that means. Rabbi Soloveitchik had a beautiful explanation in that as well. But every day of Pesach is the same korban. It's one Kedushas Hayom for 7 days. So we will yotze already with the Halal Shalom that we said on the first day of Pesach. So you don't have to repeat. So what's the question? So the Gemara already gave the explanation why you don't say Halal Shalom every day, because it's one long Kedushas Hayom that extends for 7 days. So the Zohar is asking a different question though. Why don't we say Halal Shalom on the last day? Like on Chanukah, the Halal Shalom on Chanukah is Zecher L'Nes. So why not say Halal Shalom on Shvi Shal Pesach? So on this, not because of Simchas Yontev. The 7 days of Sukkot, you say Halal once and you yotze. The Simchas Yontev is one act of Simchas Yontev for the whole Pesach. But on Chanukah, you say Halal Zecher L'Nes. So why not say Halal Shalom on Shvi Shal Pesach Zecher L'Nes Kriyas Yamsuf? So the Zohar gives the answer that. Zohar gives the answer that it's not proper to recite Halal Shalom during the period of Sfira. Sfira is a time of Avelus. So Rabbi Soloveitchik explained in the Gemara and the Goinim, they talk about Avelus because of Mesa Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. It's Avelus over the death of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. But apparently the Zohar thinks that there's an inyan of Avelus on the level of the Raisa. That the Zohar has such an idea that sometimes a person is Tameh, he needs Shiva Nikim 7 days. And sometimes if the whole nation is Tameh, so you need Shiva Nikim 7 weeks. So we count Sfira Sa'imer 7 weeks, L'Tareinu Mitumasenu. We say in the Tefillah, L'Tareinu Mitumasenu, you need Shiva Nikim. So when a person is Tameh, he's not allowed to enter the Beis HaMikdash. In a certain sense, anyone who's Tameh is observing a form of Avelus. He's far away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not allowed to come into the Beis HaMikdash. So that's what the Zohar suggests, that it's not proper to recite Halal Shalom during Sfira. So that's the answer why you don't say Halal Shalom on Shvi Shal Pesach Zecha Lenesa Kriyas Yamsuf, because it's the middle of Sfira. So the Chassidish Tzvarim say, but tomorrow morning, so that's why they have the minig that they say, and by the Seder, you're going to say Halal Shalom. You're going to say Halal, in the end of the Seder. So that's not proper to set up the Sfira period and then to say Halal Shalom. Are you going to say Halal Shalom tomorrow morning anyway? And the davening say, no, that's Halal. That's not a Halal Shalom Zecha Lenes. That's a Halal Shalom out of Simchas Yantiv. That's a different story. So this is the Chassidish explanation that they give why they had the practice to insist not to count Sfira Seimer right after Ma'ariv, why they only count Sfira Seimer after the Seder is over. So Rav Soloveitchik explained the meaning differently. He said, if you look, we don't have any Rif on Kochim. The Rif only wrote on the Mesichtas that are relevant to Halacha L'Maisa. So all the dinim of Sfira Seimer appear in Menachos, so we don't have any Rif there. So the Rif, the very last page in the Rif on Psachim, he quotes all the dinim of Sfira Seimer. And there, the Balamor and the Ravid and the Ran have discussions on the dinim of Sfira Seimer. So the Balamor raises an issue. How come on Shmini Atzeres and Chutz La'aretz we sit in the sukkah? The Gemara says, "Meisa b'yasvina bruch eloim evachina." We sit in the sukkah because it's Tzveika Diyam, and maybe Shmini Atzeres is really Hoshana Rabbah. You have to sit in the sukkah. And even though on every other Yantav Sheni Shal Goliath, let's say the second night of Pesach, when we have a Seder, we say a bracha Shekiddushana v'Mitzvos v'Tzivanu ala chilas matzah ala chilas mar. We say Kiddush, we daven Musaf. We say brachas, even though it's only a Sveika Diyam. It's a make-believe Sveika Diyam. It's not even a real Sveika Diyam. We say brachas. So the Gemara says over here, though, when you sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, you don't say a bracha. Why not? So different explanations are given by the Rishonim. So the Balamor says because it looks like a tarted asri. You're davening, you're saying Kiddush. You're saying that it's Shmini Atzeres. Then you're going to say a bracha leishem basukah. So it's going to be a tarted asri between the one bracha and the other. So that's what the Balamor and the Ravid at the end of Psachim have a whole discussion. How come we say a bracha on Sfira Sa'omer the first night? In other words, the first night of Sfira, I mean, the second night, Leil Yantav Sheni Shel Goliath. But we're going to say Kiddush. We're going to say Kiddush, and we're going to say that it's Yantav. If it's Yantav, so you're not supposed to count Sfira till the Machas HaShabbos tomorrow night. Isn't there a type that is Asri? So this is a whole discussion in the last page in the Rif. On Psachim, a discussion there, you have the Ravid and the Balamor learned Bechavrusa together. So each one wrote Hasagas on the other one Sefer. So you have Hasagas Ravid on the Balamor there, where they both work on this topic of the Tartar Asri. So that's how Rav Soloveitchik explained the Chassidish minig. He didn't give the background. He didn't give the mocker from the Zohar that they give in the Chassidish Svarim. He rather gave a mocker al pi halacha, al pi nigla. There, the Balamor also at the end of Psachim raises an issue that the Rabbi also talks about. Since we observe a Sveika Diyama, we act as if we're not sure which day is the first day of Yantav. So why don't we count Sfira Sa'omer with a Sveika Diyama? So the first night you count Hayam Yam Echad Ba'omer. The second night we should really count Hayam Yam Echad Ba'omer, Hayam Shnei Yamim Ba'omer. Maybe the first day of Pesach was Erev Pesach. Maybe the second day of Pesach was really Yantav. Maybe by us, what we call Chutzlah, the first night Chalamai. Maybe it's the first night Chalamai. So we should say Hayam Yam Echad Ba'omer and Hayam Shnei Yamim Ba'omer. Maybe the first day Pesach was Yantav. Just like we observe Sveika Diyama, why don't we observe Sveika Diyama and the Sfira Sa'omer? So the Balamor and the Ravid talk about this kasha. So it's Yodua Reb Shimon Shkop, and the Shari Yosher quotes a teretz. He heard this teretz and he forgot where he saw it. He forgot to whom. He says it's not his teretz, but he likes it. He says the Gemara has in the first parak in Bab Metzia, when you're counting Maisa Behema, the Gemara has a pasuk, you can Hasiri Yeh Kodesh Lashem. So the Gemara says Hasiri Vada V'Alei Hasiri Sofik. When you're counting, by the Gemara Kofet Sechem and Amnuyim, You have to be able, a minyan has to be bibira, bivadois. If you have a minyan that's besuffic, so that's not called a minyan. So the Rambam says, if you're going to count the second night of Sfira, you're going to say, Hayam Yamechad Ba'im, Hayam Shnei Yamim Ba'im. You're going to count misafik, that kills the whole mitzvah deraisa, because you're counting ala suffik, so it's not bivadois. So you don't introduce Sveika Diyayma in order to kill the whole mitzvah. So I remember when the Rav used to give the shir on Tuesday nights, every year, he gave so many shirms, every year he would discuss different, before Sfira, he would always discuss different aspects of Sfira. He put together everything that he said, you can put out a whole sefer just on Sfira Saimer alone. He said so much Torah. So when he would discuss this Dvar Avram, so we all thought he must have seen it in the sefer of the Dvar Avram. No, he spoke, he used to speak to the Dvar Avram and learning. When Rabbi Soloveitchik was in Berlin, in the university, so he would go, his father told him he should go. The Dvar Avram, the Kovner Rav, used to go to Potsdam for vacation. So his Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik encouraged Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik, he should go to visit Dvar Avram and talk to him and learning. So this is one of the things that he heard directly from him. He heard a few things from him. Whatever he quoted from the Dvar Avram is not based on the Sefer. I don't think he was familiar with the Sefer. He had discussed in learning with him. So he said that when the Dvar Avram told him this teretz, so he asked him, you mean to tell me that Bisman, that there was a real Sveika Diyayma? Before the days of Abai V'Rabba, when they fixed the Luach Kavua, there was a real Sveika Diyayma. You mean they didn't say a bracha? How can it be? Of course they said a bracha, and there was a real Sveika Diyayma, so they probably counted both. So that's, so he didn't like that teretz. Rabbi Soloveitchik didn't like that teretz. He gave a different teretz, and he brought rayas for that. But the whole chumrah of Sveika Diyayma is on the menegeh to malacha. Mikra Adin is on the menegeh to malacha. And Yantav doesn't apply with respect to anything else, and he showed a mocker and the Shulchan Aruch and Hilchas Rosh Hashanah to that idea. On the first day Pesach, we bench Tal. So we discontinue to say Saint Alamata, and we discontinue to say Mashavach Merid HaGeshem, because in Eretz Yisrael, in the Middle East, that area, in the summertime, just never rains. People are going on vacation. The Eretz Yisrael in the summertime, no, they don't have to take an umbrella. They don't have to bring a raincoat. It's just not going to rain. And once in a long while it rains for 3 minutes, and that's all. It rains a little bit, and that's all. It's very rare that it should rain at all in the summertime. So that's why you don't say the Saint Alamata. So the shaila is, the Tur quotes his father, the Rosh, and we have it printed in the Tshuvas HaRosh, that he argued with the Chachmei Hador, with the other Rabbanim, when originally the Rosh lived in Germany, then he moved to Spain. So this, when he was in Spain, so he argued with the other Chachamim, he said, but by us it rains every day of the year. We don't have a dry season in America. Where he lived in Spain, there is no dry season. Every day of the year it rains, summer or winter. There is no dry season. So why don't we say the Saint Alamata all year long? So they didn't accept what the Rosh argued. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said that Rab Chaim's practice was that he felt the Rosh's taina was a starke taina. So Rab Chaim's practice was, the Gemara says in the end of the first parak in Tainis, that when the tzibur needs rain, then you say Saint Alamata and Baruch Aleinu. When only a yochid needs rain, because of whatever I do for a living, I need rain in the middle of the dry season. So it's not right to say Saint Alamata and Baruch Aleinu. The yochid who needs rain should say in Shmak Aleinu. The yochid should say Saint Alamata. The Gemara there raises the question, Anshe Ninveh, the whole city has tens of thousands of Jews, and they need rain in the middle of the summertime. So should they say Saint Alamata in Baruch Aleinu? So the Gemara says no. They have sent to Shaila to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I think. So the last daf in the first parak in Tainis. So the Gemara says no. All the Jews that live in Chutz La'aretz are treated like Yechidim, and therefore they should say in Shmak Aleinu. They shouldn't say in Baruch Aleinu. They should say Saint Alamata in Shmak Aleinu. So Rab Chaim had that practice that all summer long, when we leave out the Saint Alamata and Baruch Aleinu, he thought that maybe the Rosh was right, that you should say in Baruch Aleinu. And the din in the Gemara is that if one forgot to say the Saint Alamata in the wintertime, it's Ma'akeh b'di'evid, but if you say the Saint Alamata and Shmak Aleinu, then you're Yotzeh. So he didn't want to go against the common Psak HaMekubal, that you don't say the Saint Alamata and Baruch Aleinu, but you're always Aram, Saint Alamata and Shmak Aleinu. So the Rab said he had that practice as well. He would say all summer long, Saint Alamata in Shema Koleinu. But then he said he didn't know what did Rab Chaim do with Mashiv HaRuach, because the Gemara says in the beginning of Maseches Tainis that it doesn't make sense. Mashiv HaRuach, you're not asking for the Mashiv HaRuach Merid HaGeshem, it's Ta'ori Hashem. It's describing the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's so powerful, he gives rain. So the Gemara says, if it's a season of the year that you're going to say the same Talamat, you're going to ask for the rain. So certainly you should say Mashiv HaRuach. We start saying Mashiv HaRuach and Shmini Hatzeres, even though we don't start to say the same Talamat until 60 days after the Tkufa, till December 4th. So we say Mashiv HaRuach at that season of the year, that time of the year that there's going to be rain, even though we don't actually need the rain till December 4th. So over here, where Rab Chaim was concerned, like the Rosh, that you say the Saint Alamatar, so what did he do with Mashiv HaRuach Merid HaGeshem? So Rab Soloveitchik said he doesn't know what his grandfather did. He says maybe he said Merid Atol, but he doesn't know, or maybe there's some other explanation. Maybe there's some other explanation. So Rab Soloveitchik said that was his personal practice. All summer long, he said Merid Atol, not because he davened Nusach Sfard, no, because he was going to say the Saint Alamatar and Shema Koleinu. And the Gemara says in the beginning of Tainis that it doesn't make sense to ask for rain with Saint Alamatar if you're not praising Hashem by saying Mashiv HaRuach. So he would say Merid Atol, because the Gemara says if it's the winter time and you're supposed to say Mashiv HaRuach Merid HaGeshem, b'di'evet, it said Merid Atol, so the din is that b'di'evet you yotze. He says there may be some other answer. He doesn't know. In fact, the Chazon Ish writes otherwise. The Chazon Ish writes, the Saint Alamatar, when you're asking for rain, that depends what country you live in. So you have to say the Saint Alamatar when your country needs rain. Mashiv HaRuach, you're describing the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that doesn't depend on your particular community. That depends on Yerushalayim. So it could be that that's the teretz. Maybe Rab Chaim didn't say Mashiv HaRuach at all. Maybe he left out Merid Atol because he thought like the Chazon Ish. But the Saint Alamatar, that he thought that should depend on your country. That the Gemara says. Eretz Yisrael and Bavel are different. Eretz Yisrael, they say the Saint Alamatar, Zayin Cheshvan, and in Bavel they say the Saint Alamatar December 4th, 60 days after the Kufas Tishrei. So you see that depends on each country individually, but it could be the Mashiv HaRuach, like the Chazon Ish says, that depends on Yerushalayim. These are some of the many, many insights that Rab Soloveitchik mentioned regarding in Yonei Sfira So'emer and in Yonei Talamota. Rab Soloveitchik had family traditions on many, kemat on every page in the Shulchan Aruch, he had a family tradition. And it's unfortunate that many of the Talmidim didn't understand. It's not that he doesn't hold from the Shulchan Aruch. He had traditions, he choshish for this opinion, choshish for that opinion. Many of the students misunderstood that he just felt you don't accept the Shulchan Aruch and then you pass him whenever you don't please. That was not his attitude. He had very great respect for everything in the Shulchan Aruch. In fact, many minhagim that the Mishnah Berurah says nobody observes anymore. He was a big stickler for minhagim. You have to observe every minute that's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. But he had many family traditions that you're machmer for this opinion, machmer for that opinion. There should be an eloi for the neshama of Rabbi Arbesfeld Zichron Levracha, that he was so attached to Rab Soloveitchik. That's why he wanted his Gemara Chulin to go with him. Asher Misha Balakama Talmud B'Yodi. He Zichra Baruch.
Okay, thank you, Rav Schachter. We will continue, just want to make everyone aware, we will continue to celebrate Rabbi Arbesfeld's life and legacy at the upcoming REITs virtual dinner that will take place on April 27th online. At that event, as President Berman mentioned earlier, we will install Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz in a newly established chair for REITs, a chair that Rabbi Arbesfeld asked to set up several months before his passing in honor of his father. The chair will be called the Abraham Arbesfeld Chair of the Director of the Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik Smicha Program at REITs. This new chair speaks to the immense respect that Rabbi Arbesfeld had for the yeshiva and for Rabbi Leibowitz, who will be the first holder of the chair, and that he felt it would be a special way to memorialize his father, the yeshiva. We hope that you all join us in further commemorating Rabbi Arbesfeld's life when we install Rabbi Leibowitz in this chair. Now I'd like to welcome Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig, the Nathan and Parallel Ship Chair of Talmud and REITs Rosh Yeshiva, who will be speaking on the topic of Chagas Pesach, a festival of Emunah.
Thank you very much. Am I unmuted? Is that the...
Yes, we hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. It's really very special for me to be involved in this program. Rabbi Arbesfeld was a wonderful friend and a good neighbor to daven together every morning, practically, and somebody who established the Monday night shir that I give in Queens, and of course somebody whose love and affection for the yeshiva was legendary. It wasn't just in words, it was always in deeds. Rabbi Arbesfeld devotion to our yeshiva, to its Rosh Yeshiva, to the Torah of the yeshiva, to its legacy, to its future, was really unsurpassed by others. We had many, many wonderful and dedicated board members, and he really stood out in his devotion. And of course, this very program, Kol Yom Rishon, is his program. He, was interested in it because number one, it was Harbatas HaTorah, and he was interested in any Harbatas HaTorah, but more particularly, the opportunity to spotlight the Torah of our yeshiva, both to get it out there and to encourage, the Rambam and the, participants, to have a wider outlet, was really something that he considered to be a very high priority. So it's of course very appropriate that I think the yard site was Friday or Shabbos, I'm not sure which, Vav, I think, Nisan, the yard site. It's appropriate that, that the yard site be commemorated in this way through Kol Yom Rishon. And I'll get back to, I want to say a few more words at the end, just to tie into my topic. So the topic today is the nature of the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. And I want to speak about it in a little bit of a more general way, without getting bogged down with the specific makoros, not bogged down, they always highlight, but to try to speak more generally. So let me begin with the problem and then, or with the issue, and then let me, elaborate some details that highlight, I think, an approach which makes this korban not just a korban, which unfortunately we cannot implement, bismanenu, but a concept and a perspective which is invaluable and as relevant as it ever has been to understanding what Chag HaPesach and Chag HaMatzos are all about, something that is really indispensable for every Oved Hashem as we enter into this paradigm Yom Tov, the first of the Yom Tovim, and in a way I say the model of the Yom Tovim. So in Parshas Emor, Perek Chav Gimel, the Torah delineates the Moadim. And it begins, with Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor Daber B'nei Yisrael Matar Lehem Moad Hashem Asher Tikros Mikra Kodesh Elahem Moadoi. And then it, has this brief seeming detour. Sheishes Yomim Te'aseh Malacha V'yom HaShvi Shabbos Shabboson Mikra Kodesh Kol Malacha Lo Sasu Shabbos Hila Hashem B'chol Moshvosechem. And then there's a whole discussion why we mention Shabbos at this point, but that's not for today. Then the Torah finally gets down to, what we typically identify as the holidays. Now we're really going to get, not let's say what I call the framework or the background, which is Shabbos, but the actual Moadim themselves. And of course, what better to begin with? You have two choices. One is Rosh Hashanah, if you look at the year, in terms of Tishrei. And the other, of course, is Chag HaMatzos, if you begin in Nisan. But the expectation would have been that if you are going to begin in Nisan, that the holiday that is characterized as Elam Moadei Hashem, Mikroi Kodesh, which typically reflects Isur Malacha, and the term Moed, would be that we begin with the 15th day of Nisan. Instead, another surprise, whenever the Torah surprises us, that's good. It means that there's an important lesson to be conveyed. And it's our job as Lomdei Torah to try to understand and to internalize that lesson. So this is always it's a good surprise. The Torah says, B'chodesh HaRishon, Ba'arba Asar, on the 14th day of the month, Bein Harbayim, the middle of the day, at Chatzos, after Chatzos, Pesach LaHashem, is the time of Korban Pesach. And by the way, the phrase Pesach LaHashem, Pesach for the Ribbono Shel Olam, is a very rare usage. Don't usually say Sukkot LaHashem or Yom Kippur LaHashem, and it's not Yom HaZikaron LaHashem, Pesach LaHashem. It's possible that this is the makor, as Rashi points out, Hakrovas Korban Shishmo Pesach, but it's also the makor for the din, which we'll get back to, of Korban Pesach requiring lishma, that it has to be l'shem Korban Pesach. Interesting that is emphasized here. We'll get back to that point in just a couple of minutes. But let's begin with the first problem, and that is, if the Torah begins with the Moadim, why does it begin with the 14th of Nisan, which we typically look at or think of as Erev Chag HaMatzos or Erev Chag HaPesach? And of course, it's in the next. Notice that there's no Mikra Kodesh because there's not a full Yisur Malacha. And then the Torah seamlessly goes to Ubechamisha Yom LaChodesh Hazeh, on the 15th day of this month, Chag HaMatzos LaHashem, Shivas Yom HaMatzos Tochelu, and then you have the more typical Bayom HaRishon Mikra Kodesh Yelachem, Kol Melechas Avoda Lo Sasu, V'Kraftem Isha LaHashem. You have the Korbanos Musaf, and you have the Isur Malacha and Mikra Kodesh, and so on. Why didn't the Torah begin immediately with the 15th of Nisan? Good, you bring a Korban Pesach, but that's already spoken of in Parshas Bo. There's no Musaf, there's no Mikra Kodesh. Basically, what is it doing here? And not only is what is it doing here, what is it doing here as the first of the Moadim, essentially? And this is something that obviously troubled the Mefarshim. So that the Chizkuni Alatar says, Erev Yom Tov Harishon, the holiday of Bein Harbayim Pesach isn't a Yom Tov in its own right. It's the Erev Yom Tov Rishon. And then he adds that, the Halayla, Nikru Pesach, Al Shem Shasukim Bekorban Shenikra Kach, Aval Shara Chag Milayla Harishon, the Elech Nikra Chag HaMatzos. So the Chizkuni says that Erev Chag HaMatzos and the night of Yudalid into Tesvav are sometimes called Chag HaPesach, right? And the rest of the Chag is Chag HaMatzos. But clearly he's troubled why this is here and what it's doing here. Even more explicit, the Sfarno. Bein Harbayim Pesach LaHashem says, Hiskir Inyan HaPesach, Alpha Pi She'ein Yomo Mikra Kodesh. We mention the Korban Pesach here, even though there's no Mikra Kodesh. Ki hi sibas hishtanus zmane hamoadim. And he goes on to explain that the Torah says that the holiday needs to be ba'aviv, in the spring. We are ma'aberes hashanim sometimes in order just to make sure that Pesach Doros aligns, in terms of time and season with Pesach Mitzrayim. And therefore, he says we mention the Korban Pesach because it's what took place that night, with the miracle of the Bechor and so on. He sibas ishtanus zmane hamoad. Amnam heyosa kavana sheyazman zevach haPesach ledoros mechuvenim azman shehaya zevach shel osa psicha shenasas bechatzi osa laila bekivun. We want to reenact as close as possible in the time of the year to the evening of the miracle of the Makas Bechoros and Shapasach Habati Avosenu b'Mitzrayim, and he even implies that's the reason why we count according to the moon, all the holidays, etc. But what's important for our purposes is both the Chizkuni and the Sfarno, even more the Sfarno, basically describe Pesach as Erev Chag HaMatzos, not as a Chag Bifnei Atzmo. However, the Netziv, in his Perush, Hamik Davar, disagrees. The Netziv suggests that anything that appears in Parshas HaMoadim is a Moed. Even if it doesn't look like a Moed, even if it's not characterized by the typical ingredients of a Moed, like Yisr Malach and Korban Musaf and Shalmei Simcha and so on. If it's in Parshas HaMoadim, says the Netziv, it's a Moed. Very powerful statement. Therefore, he says, we should understand from the Torah's not only inclusion, but beginning with Pesach, with the Korban Pesach, that the day of the Korban Pesach is itself a Moed. I'll add a quasi-Moed. This view of the Netziv also comes earlier in a famous Gra. The Gaon of Vilna, in a very famous comment in Hilchos Avelos, says the following. The Rama quotes the Shita that if a person is sadly in Avelos right before Pesach, so as we know, a Yom Tov wipes out the Avelos. There's a stira between Avel and Simchas Yom Tov. However, if a person's sitting Shiva, let's say he's on the third day of Shiva, okay, so Chag HaMatzos is going to end the Shiva prematurely. But at what point in the transition to Chag HaMatzos does he stop sitting Shiva? So the Rama says, at Chatzos. So the Shach, very famously, attacks that Rama. He says, I don't think it's correct. He says it should be like any other Shiva which takes place on Erev Yom Tov and which is cut short. You go as late as you need to go in order to prepare for the Yom Tov. Don't stop at Chatzos. Start an hour and a half before. We need to change your clothes, to make whatever preparations are necessary, but not earlier than that. So the Gra, defending the position of the Rama, says that the Rama is correct. And he says, Shiny Erev Chag HaMatzos, Yudalad B'Nisan, because that is the day of the Hakrava of the Korban Pesach. And what is the Korban Pesach brought? At Chatzos. Therefore, Chatzos is the proper time to terminate the Shiva. After all, says the Gra, the first pasuk, once the Torah decides to actually enumerate the Moadim, is not the pasuk of Ubechamisha Yom Lechodesh Hazeh Chag Matzos LaShem. It's the pasuk of Bar Basar Lechodesh Ben Rabbayim Pesach LaShem. In other words, the fact that Korban Pesach and Yom Yudalid are mentioned in Parshas Emor establishes that this too constitutes a kind of a moed, and therefore already at Chatzos, the basis of that moed already ends the Shiva. Indeed, the Sefer HaChinuch, a few times, when he talks about the mitzvos of the day and the day of Yudalid, suggests and also alludes to the fact that the presence of Korban Pesach in Parsha in Emor, Parshas HaMoados, establishes that there is a notion of Simcha and of Chag already on this day. And we'll see some other manifestations as well. So what emerges is that the placement of the Torah of this first pasuk strategically where it is already conveys a powerful idea. And indeed, Rabbeinu Hananel in the Gemara on Tzaddik Ches Amud Aleph, in Psachim, where the Gemara discusses the status of an onein on, Erev Chag HaMatzos, the time of the bringing of the Korban Pesach. The Rabbeinu Hananel says explicitly that Korban Pesach is like a moed. It generates simcha, and it neutralizes aspects of Avelos. Moreover, he notes the fact that we say Hallel during the Shechita and the Hakrava of the Korban Pesach all of this accentuates further the notion that this is a chag, even if it's lacking some of the more typical, ubiquitous characteristics, accoutrements of other chagim. So in other words, the Rach, the Chinuch, other Mefarshim seem to reinforce this idea that Korban Pesach generates kind of its own chag. Indeed, this seems to be the position of the Rambam as well. The Mishnah says at the beginning of Makom Shenagu that there were different views regarding whether there's a practice of refraining from malacha on the morning of Yudalit, Makom Shenagu. There were some places where they had this minhag, other places where they didn't have the minhag, etc. However, the Gemara makes it perfectly clear that after Chatzos on the day of Yudalit, even relative to other Yomim Tovim, there is some sort of a prohibition or a limited prohibition of Isur Malacha, some prohibition to do Malacha on Chag HaMatzos, after Mincha. Gemara points out that when it comes to other Shabbosos or Yomim Tovim, right, it's more of an Eitzah Tova, there's no Onesh, it's in a row of Siman Bracha, but not really much more than that. Moreover, the time is later in the day, Mincha, whereas when it comes to Erev Chag HaMatzos, there the timing is Chatzos, not the time of Mincha, Min Mincha Lamala, and the Onesh is Nidui, which is a harsh Onesh, maybe Makas Mardus, etc. So basically it seems like there is some sort of a prohibition, at least after Chatzos, Lekula Alma, to do work on Erev Chag HaMatzos, and the question is why. So while Rashi and some of the other Rishonim suggest very pragmatic reasons for this. After all, there's a lot to do Erev Chag HaMatzos, as we all know, right? There is B'tikas Chametz and Bir Chametz. And, the baking of matzahs, sometimes they would do, at that time, lechatchila, if you could, not on Shabbos, obviously, but in a typical year. There's so much to do. And of course, during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there was also, the attention required by the Korban Pesach. So it could just be that the need to focus exclusively on, both the Korban Pesach and Isur Chametz and the upcoming Mitzvahs Matzah, all of these combined, kind of quantitatively expanded the prohibition against doing malacha on Erev Chag HaMatzos. However, it's interesting that the Yerushalmi, quoted by Tosas in Makom Shenagu, seems to suggest a different explanation. Yerushalmi says that the reason that there's a prohibition after Chatzos, Erev Chag HaMatzos, to do malacha, is because that was the time when the Korban Pesach was brought. Since Korban Pesach Bein Rabbayim was brought at Chatzos, at that time already there's a prohibition of malacha. However, there are two issues that kind of dilute the impact of what Tosas says. One is, Tosas points out, that in general, whenever a member of Klal Yisrael brought a korban, a personal korban, and even the mamados, in theory, when the korban tamid was brought, the Yerushalmi says, well, every time you bring a korban, it's a kind of personal yom tov, then all of Klal Yisrael should be exempt from work, not just exempt, prohibited from work every single day in the bringing of the korban tamid. So Yerushalmi says that's true, but then of course, who would do the work and the parnasa, where would it come from? Klal Yisrael are the equivalent of being onus, I guess, when it comes to that. So we don't go that far. But the implication of Tosas is, and a little bit the Yerushalmi alone, is that while Korban Pesach is responsible for the prohibition of work on this Erev Chag HaMatzos, it's not a din specifically in Chag and in Korban Pesach. It's a din Korbanos generally, and would apply even to a Tamid or a personal Korban, etc. That's number one. Number two, Tosas addresses the question, and what about Bisman Hazeh? We no longer bring a Korban Pesach. Does that mean that there's no prohibition to do Malacha Bisman Hazeh? Tosas says no. That din, which applied Bisman HaMikdash, continues to apply in our time. It's not clear whether this is a principled statement of Tosas or it's more pragmatic. Some of the Rishonim say Shema Yibana Beis HaMikdash, or it's a low plug, or it's a Zeicher HaMikdash, or it's Davar Shebeminyan, which requires a Minyan Acher Hatiro. So there could be very technical reasons, why it's Bisman Hazeh. However, I'm saying all of this to sharply contrast it with the view of the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Yom Tov seems to say that the prohibition to do malacha after Chatzos on the day of the bringing of the Korban Pesach is a special din in Korban Pesach itself. Indeed, he emphasizes, and I'll get back to this, not only the Korban Pesach, but the Korban Chagiga as well. The Ram says the fact that we bring a Chagiga on Yudalid accompanying the Korban Pesach is very relevant to the fact that there's Isur Malacha after Chatzos, along with the Korban Pesach itself. Moreover, in the Rambam, it's pretty clear that this is not a din only in the time of the Mikdash, but that this din applies even Bisman Hazeh. The Rambam compares the status of doing Malacha after Chatzos on the day of Yudalid with that of Chol HaMoed. He says, just like on Chol HaMoed, there's a limited prohibition of Malacha, not a full complement, but prohibition. So too, same is applicable to Chatzos, Erev Chag HaMatzos. And if you look carefully at the Rambam himself, in Hilchos Yom Tov, Perek Zayin, when he explains why Chol HaMoed is Asur b'Malacha, he compares it or connects it to the fact that there's a Korban Chagiga that applies through this whole period, meaning there's Chol HaMoed is Mikra Kodesh, Chol HaMoed is related to Korban Chagiga, and therefore there's Isur Malacha. So by extension, the Rambam is telling us that when it comes to Erev Chag HaMatzos, the Korban Pesach and its own singular, I'll get to it, Korban Chagiga, the Chagiga of Yudalid, also determine that there is Isur Malacha, even though the word Mikra Kodesh doesn't appear here. It's actually a very interesting Rambam. Rambam says that just like Chol HaMoed is Asur b'Malacha, so too Erev Chag HaMatzos. And then he adds, even though Chol HaMoed is more prohibited than Erev Chag HaMatzos. Typically, we do not find that people make comparisons and then they blow up their own comparison. We know the concept of Kal V'chomer. Usually I say, well, if there's a prohibition in circumstances A, then certainly there has to be a prohibition in circumstances B, which is even more stringent. But the Rambam's saying, no, there's a prohibition in the stringent circumstances of Chol HaMoed. And even though the other, meaning Erev Chag HaMatzos, is less stringent, there's a prohibition there too. That's not a very good argument. But it is a good argument if what it is that reflects or generates the prohibition applies in both, even if not in equal force. Namely, the fact that they are connected to Yom Tov. One case, it's the sandwich in between, the Chol HaMoed. In the other case, it's the Erev before, but apparently a unique Erev. More importantly, the Karbanos, in each case, apparently establish a certain stature and character of the day, which in turn dictates Isur Malacha. That's what the Rambam holds. If you look at the Rambam Hilchos Kli HaMikdash, Perek Vav, there, the Rambam speaks more generally about personal karbanos and what impact they have on the ability to be involved in eulogies or fasting or malacha. And the Rambam doesn't formulate the prohibitions the same way that he does in Hilchos Yom Tov with regard to Korban Pesach. The conclusion to be reached is that according to the Rambam, the big idea seems to be that the prohibition to do malacha on Erev Chag HaMatzos is not technically because there's a korban. Then it wouldn't apply Bizman Hazeh. And then it would be treated in the same way as he treats other personal karbanos. The fact that Korban Pesach is brought and with it accompanied by a unusual, I'll get to that in a minute, Korban Chagiga called Chagigas Yudalid, signifies that this is a quasi-holiday, in the same way that the Chinuch and the Rach and the Gra and the Netziv explain. Again, further reinforcing the importance of the Torah beginning the Moadim with Chag HaPesach itself. But now let's take a step back and try to understand halachically and ashkafically what this means. Why is it that bringing Korban Pesach reflects and generates a Chag, right? A holiday. Not a full holiday, something closer to kind of Chol HaMoed, but something which we don't have in any other, not Erev Chag HaSukkos and not even Erev Yom Kippur, which has a little bit of a holiday status. We say Kol Ha'ochel B'Chi, Ki'ilu Nis'ane B'Chi V'Asiri, you eat on Erev Yom Kippur, that's considered a quasi Yom Tov. It doesn't have Isur Malacha, nothing like what we encounter. Why is it? Why does this korban accomplish this goal? Moreover, if you examine the korban of Korban Pesach, and again, we only have, another half an hour to do this or a little less. One of the things that's unique about Korban Pesach is how much of a rule-breaking korban it is. It has many of the same laws as other korbanos, but kind of recast or reformulated, for the sake of Chag HaPesach. As if the halacha, as if the Torah was telling us, there's enough common denominator with korbanos to make you just notice also how singular and unique this particular korban is. We'll get back to some of them, but let me just highlight it quickly in a bigger way. Typically, all korbanos are brought between the Tamid Shel Shachar and the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. Every day in the Beis HaMikdash, they brought, two Tmidim, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, Bein Arbaim. And all of the korbanos of the day, individual korbanos, collective korbanos, national korbanos, were typically brought between one and the other. That's the framework for the day in the Mikdash. It's as if to say, well, it's an important statement about the Tmidim, but that's not for now. In other words, but the korbanos all fit in, within the framework of the world of korbanos. And that world of korbanos is mostly described in Bamidbar, in Parshas Pinchas. One korban stands out for being outside the framework of the Tmidim. The principle of Aleha Hashleim, that you have to, get the korban in prior to the Tamid Bein Arbaim, does not apply to Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is after the Tamid Shabbein Rabbi. As if to say, this is a korban, but it's not a typical korban. This is a korban that is sui generis. It's just singular. It's unique. I always like to say, Korban Pesach is a Shemos korban, not a Vayikra. We just started Vayikra, Torah's Kohanim. Right? If you ask, even a Bar Rav, Tinoko Shobes Rabban, where does the Torah deal with korbanos? It's Torah's Kohanim. It's Vayikra. Right from the beginning, Adam Kiyakrav became korban, Olos and Chatos and Shlamim, and then you even have the unusual korbanos, Par Halam Davar Shal Tzibor, the Par of the Nasi. Okay. And then, of course, you have the reference in Emor to the fact that there are Musafim that are detailed in Bamidbar. Korban Pesach, not dealt with in the beginning Parshios of Vayikra. It's dealt with in Shmos, in Parshas Bo. And then it's referred to in Vayikra, in Emor, as the first pasuk of the Moadim. And that's not a parsha of Karbanos. As the Ramban notes, we leave the Musafim and Karbanos, we make reference that there are Karbanos. I would explain, because part of a Chag is the fact that there are Karbanos. But it's not the parsha of the Karbanos. That's in Bamidbar, or earlier in Vayikra. Only Korban Pesach has, and a little bit Omer and Shnei Lechem, but that's for a different reason, have this status. Why is it outside the Tmidim, symbolically in that outside that framework, a Shmos Korban, and only kind of emphasized in terms of the Zman? Well, partly because it is such a rule-breaking Korban, as we'll discuss. But let me take a step back and analyze why this is so. The answer seems to be because of historically the role that Korban Pesach played at a pivotal moment in Klal Yisrael's history. Because I'll say that with Korban Pesach, b'damai chayi, with Dam Milah and Dam Pesach, but here the Dam Pesach in a way also motivated the Dam Milah, b'damai chayi, Klal Yisrael merited Geula. Certainly they needed mitzvos. They were on the threshold of the 50th Shara Tumah, from which there was no return. But why choose these two mitzvos? And in particular, Korban Pesach, which is the catalyst for the other. The answer is, as Chazal explained, that what was necessary to trigger the Geula of Mitzrayim was a remarkable, unequivocal, startling act of emunah, of trust in the Ribbono Shel Olam and belief in the Ribbono Shel Olam. Ad sheyishketu Eloheim li'einayim. The ability to respond to Tzivu Hashem, Hashem's command, and to slaughter the idol or the god of the Egyptians publicly, and especially given the background of who and what stage these people were in. Again, we're all very familiar with the story. Familiarity is a great thing, and it also undermines sometimes the capacity to fully appreciate the magnitude of what we're so familiar with. Ad sheyishketu Eloheim li'einayim was not just a turning point, it was a transformative moment in the history of Klal Yisrael. And it was the first, I would say, stage in Hayom Hazeh Niyesa L'Am, in the nationhood of Klal Yisrael. Let's explain who Klal Yisrael were by noting the famous parshanut of the Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra is typically, thought of as a very dry commentary, dikduk and so on. Very valuable, but certainly typically dry. But there's some very seminal, exceptions to that rule. And the Ibn Ezra's take on Yetzias Mitzrayim and K'nisa La'aretz are examples of that. The Ibn Ezra explains why it was that Klal Yisrael panicked to the extent that they did on Yam Suf. After all, they had just experienced Yad Hashem, right? Etzba Lokim, I don't know how many, osos and mofsim that were unnatural and that unequivocally established the Rabboni Shalom's existence, his divine providence, his commitment to protection of Klal Yisrael, right? So why panic, after all of that, after witnessing and visualizing all of that, why panic at Yom Tov? So the Ibn Ezra famously provides us with a penetrating psychological insight. He says, we're dealing with a nation of slaves. They had been in bondage for generations. And that engenders a slave mentality. And it's an emotional response, not an intellectual one. Intellectually, they knew what they saw and they knew what they believed. But when they saw the Mitzrim coming towards them at Yam Suf, they couldn't help but see their master. They didn't see enemy. They would have been strong enough to overcome an enemy. They saw their enslavers. They couldn't help but see that. So ingrained was the experience of generations of slavery upon that people. For the same reason, the Ibn Ezra in another piece explains, it was an onesh, but it was also necessary, or the onesh took the form that it did, that almost all of Klal Yisrael die out in the Midbar so that a new generation could enter into Eretz Yisrael. Because Ibn Ezra said, as much as they presently were experiencing Kairos, it was always difficult to take Mitzrayim away from that generation. That element of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the internal one, the psychological one. The slave mentality, the Golus mentality, whatever you want to call it, is not so easily simply discarded and rejected. And therefore, it was necessary to begin a new chapter in Eretz Yisrael, that there be a generation which had not experienced servitude, which didn't exist, as servile, as slaves to a master. Given this reality, the ability of Yishchetu Eloheim Li'eneim was a shining moment, as was Vayaminu B'Hashem U'B'Moshe Avdo at the time of Yam Suf, but a different kind of shining moment. The ability to put it all on the line for Emunah, notwithstanding how deeply ingrained in the psyche of the people and each individual the slave mentality was a truly remarkable achievement. And from that point of view, it established Korban Pesach as a singular type of Korban, not simply Kiruv La'avodas Hashem, but it established the principle of Emunah, deep belief, unshakable belief in the Rabboni Shalom, and the capacity to sacrifice for that belief, the ability to take principled stands, notwithstanding the fallout, the price that you pay. And that was truly a transformative moment to Klal Yisrael that established this Korban as a Korban Emunah, which defined its contours and many of its details. It took it outside of the Tmidim and the regular framework of Korbanos. Important to understand what's singular about this Korban. And at the same time, this Korban Emunah justified Simcha and a kind of quasi Yom Tov in its own right. So, for example, mentioned before, that the word Pesach LaHashem is explained by Chazal as the source why Korban Pesach needs to be Lishma. The Mishnah says in the beginning of Zvachim that Kol HaZvachim, every Zevach Lechatchila should be Lishma. L'Shem Oso Zevach. Just give me 1 second. I promised that I would do this. Every korban is supposed to be lishma. However, typically the rule is that it's not ma'akev. Elo shelo olo bailim l'shem chova. The korban is kosher, even if it isn't lishma, although you might have to bring another one to fulfill the chiyuv. The two prominent exceptions are korban chatas and korban pesach. That's what the Mishnah says. Bishloma korban chatas, we understand. Korban chatas is about kapara, and that has to be not only, lechatchila lishma, but diavad lishma. If you want to atone or expiate through your korban, then the level of sincerity and focus needs to be there. But korban pesach is not a kapara. In fact, of all korbanos, it's one of the least kapara-oriented, maybe non-kapara-oriented. The zrika, the sprinkling of the dam, which is connected to kapara, is actually downplayed. And korban pesach is all about the shchita and the achila, and so on and so forth. And it's kachim kalim. It's light kachim. Why is it that an ola and an asham, their lishma is not ma'akev? Only the lishma of a korban pesach and a chatos. Strange korban fellows, frankly. But the answer is, in the makar, Pesach LaHashem. The whole idea of korban pesach, what makes it singular, what takes it outside of Vayikra to Shemos and outside of the Tmidim, what makes it rule-breaking in many of its dinim, is because it's Pesach LaHashem. The whole point was this was a moment of clarity and of emunah. And as such, the need for lishma, total focus, exclusive focus, clarity of mind, clarity of purpose, became a necessity. The Or Sameach has a very interesting discussion. He says he's very bothered by this question, why Korban Pesach of all korbanos together with chatas. So he says, well, could be this reason, could be that reason. They also point out that in one respect, the lishma of korban pesach is even more demanding than chatas. Rambam paskins that if you bring a korban chatas l'shem chulin, you bring this korban, you say, I just want to eat the korban. So it actually doesn't pass all the korban, because we have a rule. It's called b'mino machriv, shelo b'mino lo machriv. Meaning, if you say a korban chatos l'shem ola, chatos l'shem shlamim, you're in the ballpark and it's a distraction and it's lo lishma. You say chatos l'shem chulin, it's so far afield that we say, it doesn't really register. B'mino machriv, shelo b'mino lo machriv. It's too far, we don't take it seriously. However, when it comes to Korban Pesach, there's no makar for this, but the Rambam, on his own initiative, paskins that the lishma of Korban Pesach does not even allow l'shem chulin. If you bring Korban Pesach l'shem chulin, it's possible. Or somebody else says, I don't understand. It's bad enough. I mean, it's difficult enough to understand why you treat Korban Pesach as the equivalent of a chatas, even though it's kachim kalim and so on. But you're even more machmir. And he gives several answers. But of course, one of the answers may very well be that the requirement of lishma and korban pesach is very different even than chatas, because there's nothing to do with the kapara. It has to do with the fact that korban pesach is a korban emunah. It's all about that clarity and that focus and the motivation of being Am Hashem. And as such, the abstruse, arcane halachos of Karbanos exhibit and exemplify the uniqueness of this Karban. It's Pesach Lashem, Ad Sheyishketu Eloheim Leineim. It's out of the Tmidim, it's in Shmos, it breaks all the rules, and it generates its own Simcha, its own Isra Malacha, its own Karban Chagiga, say a word about that if I get a chance, etc. It's the Karban Emunah which generates Simcha. The Torah says in Parshas Bo, after finishing the narrative part of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Torah shifts a little bit. Tells the whole story. Then it shifts to the halachos, and it wants to detail the dinim of Korban Pesach. First of all, it's very strange. Just a peculiar continuation. We're in the middle of the narrative. We're all sitting at the edge of our seats, entranced by what's happening in Mitzrayim, and hopefully re-experiencing it, Kiluhu atzmo yatsa ato mi Mitzrayim. And then all of a sudden we get a break for the halachos of Korban Pesach, this abstract, abstruse, elitist, halachos. Why? And the Torah introduces it, Zos Chukas HaPesach. I always like to say, it's like a drum roll, like, the cadences. Here's the Pesach. Here are the laws of the Pesach. Well, we're waiting for some edifying, inspirational, follow-up. What does the Torah say? Kol benechar leyochal bo. A benechar cannot participate. We interrupt the narrative for the dinim. I mean, I'm a halachist. I obviously believe that the halachos are the meat, and they're the subtle way that the Torah conveys the purpose of everything. You have to merge the two. I think that's why it's here. But of these Dinei Korban Pesach, but the first one, so you'd expect something about it being Korban Emunah, something about something. What do you get after the drum roll? Negative campaigning. Who cannot participate? Who's excluded? They always tell you, speak positively. Let's talk about, what we share in common, not who's excluded. You have to get around to who's excluded. Those are the standards. But at Korban Pesach, it starts that way. Strange. And what does it mean? It means a non-Jew and a Meshumad. First of all, in other halachos, a non-Jew and a Meshumad are not identical. Yisrael Afa Pishachata Yisrael, who is our standard view, our differences. A Yisrael Meshumad is obligated in other karbanos. Why not here? And to equate with Nachri. Nachri is not excluded from karbanos. Depends which karban. Right, on Sukkot we bring karbanos for the Nachri. Why do we start in this negative tone? Why do we equate Nachri and Meshumad? Another piece of the puzzle. The Rambam says that the Isser of Kol B'nechar Leyochal Bo is actually a prohibition to feed a Nachri or a Meshumad Korban Pesach, to be machil. Other Rishonim, the Smag and others, it's really ambiguous in the pasuk. Kol B'nechar Lo Yochal Bo, in the pshat. What does it mean? A B'nechar will not eat, does not eat. It doesn't say B'nechar don't eat. So who's it going on? The B'nechar or the Yisrael? And if it only meant Nachri, you could say, well, the Torah is not addressed to Nachrim, although that's a discussion in the Achronim as well. Some dinim in the Torah are addressed to Nachrim. It's a B'nai Noach. But certainly if it's also addressed to the Yisrael Meshumad, why is it written so ambiguously? And if the Rambam is Mechadesh, that Kol B'nechar Leyochal Bo means you can't feed him. Minchas Chinuch says you can't feed him also, but certainly he can't eat, or you only can't feed him. Like, what is that? According to the Rambam, it seems that there's no malchus. There might be a lav she'ein bo ma'isa. Why? Everybody's eating. Feeding is eating. It's an action. Again, the short part of the story, in my opinion. What the Rambam says is extremely consistent with everything else that he says about Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is a Korban Emunah. The Chinuch says, why Korban Echel le'yochel bo? The Chinuch says it. It's a Korban Emunah. He said it would be so offensive to let a Meshumad participate in this Korban. I'll add, even though typically Yisrael Afa Bishachata Yisrael. But in this Korban, which is all about principle and standing up for the Ribono Shel Olam, here we equate a Meshumad with a non-Jew. But the bigger point is, it's not an Isser for them to eat. It's totally insensitive for a good member in standing of Klal Yisrael to be too liberal when it comes to the Korban Pesach. Again, normal being expansive and being makarev, these are very good, important qualities. But when it comes to a Korban, which is based on emunah and principle, ad sheyishketu alehem leoneim, and sacrifice, there to ignore egregious rejection of emunah would be completely antithetical. So what does the Torah do? Zos chukas haPesach. If you really want to understand what this holiday is all about, zos chukas haPesach kol b'necha le'yochel bo, not negative campaigning. It, together with other dinim of Korban Pesach, highlights what is unique and what is conveyed by this Korban. The sense of principle, the sense of devotion to the Ribono Shel Olam, no matter what. And therefore, we're not interrupting the narrative with technical and even exclusive dinim of Korban Pesach. We're explaining how the narrative got turned into a norm which in every way, brilliantly, divine brilliance, Ribono Shel Olam's construction, highlights what is singular about the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's many, many more rayas and evidence and expansive to say about this. But then we can understand why, to what we begin with, Korban Pesach is the first pasuk in Parshas HaMoadim, why the Gra and the Netziv are correct. Because we celebrate, there is no Chag HaMatzos without first Chag HaPesach. And the themes which the Korban Pesach embodies really highlight why it is that Chag HaMatzos can be introduced and can achieve and attain the stature and the status that it does. Let me just conclude by saying the following. Rabbi Arbesfeld, as I mentioned at the outset, I knew him on so many different levels. I was Zoche, as a neighbor, as a friend, as a Rebbe in the Yeshiva, whose devotion, as I say, knew no end, whose sense of Hakaras HaTov, and whose sense of deep understanding of what is unique about our yeshiva is really a model for us all. He was a very remarkable man. And he was a very pleasant person, a wonderful person to talk with. He had very strong opinions, but he was a kind man, person who reached out to others, who had a lot of different relationships. But he was also an extremely principled person. He was somebody who knew when to say Yikov Adin Sahar. And that stemmed from a deep sense of emunah, which I think came from his father. He told me many times that his father was a painter. I see Benjy's in the crowd. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. But his father was a painter because he used to lose his job every Shabbos when he wouldn't go into work. Again, we take so much for granted now. But somebody to be Shomer Shabbos, and to make a parnasa in that period was a huge nisayon. Only somebody who was a remarkable mamin could do that. And this was instilled in his son. And the most important thing was to make sure he got a proper chinuch. Rabbi Arbesfeld's description of his, relationship to going to MTA and then the yeshiva and what that meant for him, the greatest days of his life, that all flows from the values that he imbibed from his parents. That's why he had such a koras hatov to them, and the memorialization of the to-go and the Kol Yom Rishon and all the other things, his parents and his in-laws, together with his wife, Tibad L'chaim, and children. He was somebody who reached out, but was a man of principle, and he got that from home. I recall one time when the yeshiva was facing, as we always do, complicated issues, the details certainly not for now, issues of standards and issues of standing up to principles of morality, which are sometimes more and more, incongruent with the standards of society. I remember I was at a REITs board meeting. This came up, and Rabbi Arbesfeld spoke very principally, very strongly about what the yeshiva's perspective needs to be. And one of the other members turned to him, said to him, they'll boycott he owned hotels. They'll boycott your hotels, And he just, without blinking an eyelash, said, let them boycott my hotels. Principle is principle, and we have to stand up for belief in the Rabbanu Shalom and the standards of Torah. So I think it's very appropriate that the Yortzeit, I think it was Vav Nisan, just, days before, not only Chag HaMatzos, but also Chag HaPesach, which is Erev Chag HaMatzos, necessarily. The time of Emunah, the time whose conveying of Emunah engenders great simcha, a korban chagiga, a quasi Isur Malacha, but more a deep sense of hakaras hatov and appreciation that Hayom Hazeh Niyeh La'am, that Klal Yisrael is unique and singular. And that while we're a force of good in the world, it begins with our sense of deep understanding of who we are and our sense of principle and consistency. So Yehi Zechro Baruch, he's somebody who is unforgettable and whose impact continues, even as we miss him terribly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reb Rosenzweig. Thank you to all of the Rashi Yeshiva who shared their words of Divrei Torah and Divrei Hisorus with us this morning in memory of Rabbi Arbesfeld. We want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Rabbi Arbesfeld's legacy is, of course, not only in his unparalleled dedication to the vitality and vibrancy of the yeshiva itself, but his commitment to ensuring that the Torah and the guidance and inspiration of the yeshiva extended beyond its walls. And in that regard, I had the great privilege of working together with him on the Torah to Go publication, on the Kol Yom Rishon and Midreshet Yom Rishon experiences. He would call often with detailed feedback and advice and guidance in terms of how we could best represent the yeshiva out to the larger public and the larger world. And we miss him very dearly. And the words of Torah today should certainly be an aliyah for his neshama, and the messages of our revered Rabbeim and Rashi Yeshiva should certainly allow all of us to internalize so much of what he stood for and to continue to perpetuate his legacy through all of the different opportunities that we have to study Torah from each other and with each other. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you to the family for hosting today's program. And we wish everyone a Chag Kosher v'Sameach.